again by Benning. Darnell Nurse left it in the corner, gets up center. Perry scores! Corey Perry!
Ilya able to shake away from Solani. It's given away to Solani. Around in front. Score! Teemu Solani with the steal.
Three of the fans want one. Score! Off the floor! On the board! Paul Kariya!
All right, we made it.
And then the guy goes, "Look, buddy, that's not a dog. That's my wife."
What is that
So,
from?
that was awkward.
I've heard that so much fun. About fucking time. We made it. It said to 7:30. It's now 8:07. But we
Yeah,
did
we're
it.
right on time. We're right on schedule.
We did it. We got there. At the very least, I saved you guys, anybody who's here, that stuck around for the last 37 minutes, from a very choppy, not fun to watch stream. We fixed it. I reset my computer to try and fix the streaming issues that we've had the last couple times, and forgot to install a couple things and fix a couple settings. and then my internet decided to cut out, so that didn't work. But hey, you know what? At the end, we made it. It's not about how quick you get there. It's about crossing the finish line. So unless you're in a
That's
race,
right.
unless you're in a race, then maybe not. But draft preview episode part 2, because we'd spent 2 hours talking about the number 10 pick and some of the trades that the Ducks could make in the draft, and now we have to come back for a part 2 to talk about pick number 22 and some of the other picks in second round and beyond. So, otherwise, you would have had like a 4-hour episode, which I don't know if you guys would have liked that.
Jason would have killed us before we got that far.
Yeah, he was already killing us. I think we just went over 2 hours, and he wanted to kill us. So,
Which, to be fair, I wouldn't want to spend 2 hours with us either.
No, yeah, and also to be fair, we did give him a specific time that we would be done, and then proceeded to go about 40 minutes over that time.
Which, based on right now, is about right.
It's about right, yeah. Because we
By
always say
7:30.
we always say we'll start at a certain time, and then that time, just give or take a half an hour whenever we say that we're gonna be live. So that's usually how it goes. But yeah, who were our recapping our last show, our picks for number 10? Who was your guy? Who was it again? Just so
My guy's Nazar.
Yeah,
I think
so Brett knows,
Nazar. Yeah. Yeah, I think Nazar, Casper, I can be talked into Korchinski. I think the upside is solid enough that I would be very open to it. But I think, well, it's interesting actually, because I was thinking about this earlier, thinking about like 22 and some of the players around there, and like, which would you like? Okay, so let's say you came out of the first round, right, with 2 players at the same position. Would you rather it be like, let's say, Marco Casper or Frank Nazar and Rutger McGroarty? Or would you rather it be like Kevin Kaczynski and maybe like Owen Pickering? Korchinski, sorry.
Yes, and Casper and Nazar were separate, right? One of those 2 at 10, and then...
One of those 2 at 10, and then like McGroarty at 22. Or Snuggerud, if you want. Mm-hmm. Like one of those 2. Or like a Korchinski, Minchikov / maybe like a Lamoureux or a Pickering with that 22 pick.
It's
because I feel like Michelle will go with Pickering.
I could see them going both ways, and I'm honestly like not too indifferent with either of them. I don't have a huge preference whether they go forward or D at 10 and then switch it up and take the opposite at 22. Like I am still leaning towards Korchinski because I do like bringing in a high-end potential left-handed defenseman to a system that doesn't really have anybody that projects to be that. Like I think Zellweger can get there. I just don't ever really foresee a pairing of Zellweger-Drysdale. So looking at somebody who could maybe jump up on that top pairing. Zellweger has shown he can play on the offside, so maybe he plays with Cam or Hellison or whoever down the road. So I do like the chance here to add that. knowing that potentially next year, the top end of the draft, you're looking to grab a forward. But I never, again, like it contradicts myself. You don't want to draft this year based on what you could get next year. But I think if that high end forward is there and they're high up your list, like if Nazar is so high up your list compared to the defenseman, or if they like Casper a lot more, I'm always fine with them taking whoever they want, whoever's the best player available at that point. My only issue, like if Pickering is the guy at 22, I think I'm fine with that, because if Pickering and Bichelle and some of those other bigger defensemen are gone by 22, which they very well could be, I think that's where I lean towards getting Krasinski or Mintyukov or something like that at 10, just because I think the bigger defensemen start to dwindle a little bit. You've got a lot of kind of 5'10", 5'9", just scraping 5'11" defensemen. Chesley, I think Seamus Casey's 6 foot. Matthias Havlid.
I think Chesley's 6 foot. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got a lot of those guys in that 20 to 40 range. Again, one of Brett's favorite guys, Havlid, is going to be available in that range as well. I don't like, and I have nothing against the small kids on defense, because obviously we have 2 of them, and Zellweger's 5'10" and Dreisaitl's 5'11". I don't know how many more of those you can add and look to have half your defense core under 6 foot. I know we're getting a bit more progressive at the NHL level, and smaller players can make it happen. I don't know if you can have a team full of those on your blue line. Maybe that's the way of the future. I don't know, but I am more comfortable with a defenseman at 22 if it is like Pickering and Bichelle. Like, they don't have to be those guys who are monsters at 6'5",
right.
but even Kaczynski is 6'2".
You could get Chesley.
Yeah.
Krasinski and Chesley would be great.
Yeah.
But here's the thing: which would you rather be, 2 defensemen or 2 forwards? Which would you rather it be if you had to pick?
In this draft, 2 forwards.
Knowing going into round 2 in this draft, you would rather go 2 forwards?
I like the forwards from 15 to 30 better than I do the defensemen. Or more, I like more of them than I do the defenseman. I think there's a better chance that you're getting a quality forward in that range than you are a defenseman, just upside basis. So if I had to pick, I would go two forwards.
Yeah. It's
not a great draft. Like, it's not a bad draft, but it reminds me of the Hischier, Nolan Patrick draft, where, there's a little bit of debate again for number 1. But the potential for a lot of these guys, like, it's not great. It doesn't see, there's no Matthews, there's no McDavid in this draft of standout prospect. And then, the depth of it outside maybe the top 5 or 6, it drops off a little bit. And then once you get outside, I guess, like the top 11 or 12 from there, it drops off again. And there's, I put together consolidated rankings of guys ranked in the first round of 15 of the top kind of rankings from the top guys: Scott Wheeler, Pronman, Bob McKenzie, all the different outlets. Only 44 different guys were ranked in the first round. Had a first round vote, at least one first round plug. So there's a bunch of different guys. Like, it is really kind of all over the place where guys are going, and that either means one of 2 things: it's a really deep draft, or it's not it really does have a drop off, and there's a lot of kind of parity or variety in terms of where guys are getting ranked. And I think it's more so the latter, where there is a lot of kind of variety from the guys around. Some guys are ranked as high as 15 and as low as 36 or 40, right? So it really just kind of depends this year.
Yeah, I think I think with drafts like these, like you're saying, I think this one is more about uncertainty. When you think about the big question marks and knocks against Shane Wright, right? It's, well, he lost that year of development, but didn't look like he was really taking the jump this year. And we know that there were different things that factored into that, but still, that's a thing we're concerned about. And, you've got Brad Lambert, who, went from a guy we were thinking about a year ahead to a guy that now could slip into the early second round potentially.
Yeah.
Pronman has him going 29th, I think, in his last mock draft. You've got, I think there are a lot of players, but I think definitely the thing to say is, like, if there is any truly, like, elite players in this draft, it more than likely is going to be somebody taking a huge leap that was a very small percentile of what you would think they were capable of, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, listen, I think Shane Wright is going to be a top player, so I don't want to discredit him by saying, okay, there's no superstars in this draft. I think Jurek Slafkovsky, I think Logan Cooley, I think there's the chance for those guys to become superstars at the NHL level. But it is, all things considered, when you look at last year's draft and when you look at next year's draft, I think it's the weaker of the three. In terms of depth of prospects near the top, in terms of guys who have potential to turn into all-stars and star quality players in this draft. I think if you look in the history draft, you go back and look at it, it's not the greatest, not turning out to be the greatest draft, and I feel like this has kind of the shades of potentially turning into that, but you never know, right? Like all these guys could hit at some point, and it is an interesting draft in the sense that a lot of these guys missed playing time last year because of the pandemic. So that you missed a full year of development. They are potentially a little bit behind some of their peers and some of the guys we'll see next year who will kind of have that longer runway of playing a couple of years and playing their D-1 season. So that comes into it. And I mentioned that with Shane Wright and why the stock has fallen a little bit. Didn't get that year of development, and people were expecting him to come out this year as if he had, right? And to put up 120 points, and it didn't happen. And I think, the same might be able to be said for Brad Lambert, and that could play into some of his struggles and why he didn't come out with an extra gear this year and put the production together. And some guys did figure it out, but there are a lot of cases of those guys. Rutger McGrody at one point was considered a potential top 5 pick,
top 4, top 5 pick. Yeah.
Connor Geekie was in that same discussion as well, and their seasons didn't go as well as planned, and that happens every year. But it felt like this year more than any year of recent memory, that we had a lot of those guys that, early last year, if you go back and look at right after the 2021 draft of like very early 2023 mocks, guys, Lambert, McGrody, all those guys were near the top, and they've fallen off, and I haven't seen that in a while, of guys that really drop off within the year because of their performances at almost outside the first round. I've seen Geekie, I think he'll go earlier, but I've seen him ranked as low as like 25, 26. McGrody I've seen ranked in the second round. Like, it's and then obviously Lambert, like you'd said. So it is pretty crazy to see the drop off from a lot of those guys.
Yeah, so I guess, like, we talked about Korchinski, we talked about him being an upside guy as far as the 10 pick, and I feel like it would be safe to say, of the guys who could reasonably be expected to be there, the highest upside of the guys that we have talked about is probably Nazar and Korchinski, right? I would say Nazar's peak is probably higher than Kasper's, because I don't think Kasper has the offensive skill.
Yeah, I would say, like, I think, again, the crazy thing with this draft is it depends who you ask, because for as an example of a ranking, you look at elite prospects in their draft guide, they have Frank Nazar as the player with the highest ceiling. And then I think it was Prawn or somebody has Nazar outside the top 20. So it's obviously, again, not a guy who, in their opinion, has the top ceiling. The only guys consistently ranked, the only guys of all the consolidated rankings I took that were ranked in the top 3 was Wright, Cooley, and Slafkovsky. So I think, based on consolidated rankings, it's fairly easy to say that those are the 3 guys with the highest ceiling right now, all things considered, lower floors than some other guys, but just from what the consensus opinion tends to be. But then you've got Lambert, again, who I think, if everything gets put together, there are a lot of people who believe that he has the highest ceiling. But then again, he's ranked as high as 4 or 5 still on some lists because of that, and outside the first round on others. So it's just it's wild. I think Lambert still, for me, if every player in this draft hits their highest potential, I think he has the highest ceiling of everybody. But he needs to put it all together, and the real tough question is, can he actually do that? And we talked about it a lot when we profiled who the Ducks could get at number 10 on the first part of this, and the question mark surrounding if he could put it together. I think if he does, he has the highest ceiling. I think of defensemen, I tend to lean to Korchinski just because I think once he gets, another season under his belt playing at 6'2" and gets I think he can refine his defensive game a bit. I think of the offensive defensemen available, I think he has the highest upside and the best chance to be like a 40, 50 point defenseman power play quarterback. So I would still lean to that. But you ask 10 different people, Mintyukov will be their top defenseman, highest ceiling. Matachuk will be if he figures it all out. People obviously still going for Nemec and Jiricek because those are the top 2 defensemen in the draft. I've heard votes for Lane Hudson as guy who's projected late first, early second as a guy who could be the best defenseman from this draft. The only thing holding him back is his size, but he's listed by a lot of people as the smartest player in this entire draft. So it's all over the place in terms of who has the highest upside as a forward and as a defenseman. It really depends on who you ask.
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned Lambert there because this is where I was going with the Korchinski-Nazar thing. How comfortable would you be going into Friday, right? Like you go to bed Thursday night knowing that they took Korchinski and Lambert. Where would you be at mentally with that?
If it was between Korchinski and Lambert at 10, you mean?
No. They took that was their first 2 picks. Oh. They kept 10, they kept 22. They take Korchinski at 10 and they take Lambert at 22.
Yeah, I don't hate it because I do like, and I think we talked about this like real early talks about this draft. The Ducks are in need of kind of one thing or one type of prospect, and that's guys with a very high ceiling to potentially become stars on this team. They've got a lot of pieces that we know kind of could fit in the middle 6 or the bottom 6. Guys like Colangelo and Max Jones still with the team. You could list off, Pastuov and Tracy and Sean Shigurl. Like, those are all guys that could probably fit in the middle 6, bottom 6 if you're unlucky, right?
Max Comtois, still young, still on the roster. Yeah, Isaac Lundstrom, still young, still on the roster.
So they need guys who have the best chance or have the highest ceiling of becoming that superstar player, that bona fide top 6 winger or top 4 or top 3 defenseman on your team. It's not, it's the biggest swing of the fences, I think, going for Korchinski and Lambert at 10 and 22 is you're swinging hard, and
it's ambitious.
A very, very high chance that both of them don't pan out. But if they both hit, you walk out of this the clear winners of the draft. If they both hit their potentials, you walk out with potentially the best player in the draft in Brad Lambert and potentially the best defenseman in the draft in Kevin Korchinski. So, I mean, it would be the ultimate of swings to go out and do that. So I would be worried and concerned, and obviously just for the fact that they don't hit and that it does set you back. But man, like you gotta give them some credit there for the balls to be able to go out there and take both of those guys with the concerns that swirl around them. Like, it's something we said about taking one and then that second pick, or one of the picks go for the safer option. So like, let's say Casper at 10 and Lambert at 22, or you take the safer pick at 22 instead. So you take Korchinski at 10 and you take, the Bichelle or something like that at 22, or McGrody, a guy who, looks like for sure they'll make the NHL, at least as like a middle 6 guy or a third line forward. But the potential upside there is a little bit of a longer reach of whether they could be in that top 10. So yeah, I mean, it would be a real swing to go out and get Korchinski and Lambert. I'd respect it though, man, for going out in your first draft as Pat Verbeek and just swinging for the fences with those 2 guys. It'd be some pretty wild behavior. I would respect it.
I mean, I can't think, I guess, short of some crazy trade, right? To, other than making a trade up to like 1 or 2.
Yeah.
I can't think of a more clear expression that this isn't the same old front office, right, as before, as that. Like, trading up to get a guy and just be like, this is the guy we want, we're going to pay to get him, or taking 2 huge swings on upside. I think those are about as two of, I guess, plans, right, or decisions that you could make that would just so clearly show that this is not this is not the old Ducks front office. Like, this is a new front office. This is an office, like a front office that wants to go out. And I don't know if Pat Verbeek wants to do that. I don't know if, that's like considered like ostentatious or even arrogant or unnecessary, right? But I just think one of those two things would be a really phenomenal way to really set yourself up to kind of, I think, earn the respect of the fan base, I think, early on. Take a big swing of any kind, right? Even if they trade John Gibson, like, that's still a thing that, regardless of how the perception of him is around the league, in Anaheim, he's still a meaningful player. Yeah. And, moving him out would be significant. So, it's just, I think having the 10 and the 22 and then 42 and having some interesting trade chips and some weird teams in the top 15, it creates some really interesting opportunities, I guess, for different teams to pursue. And I'm really curious to see if anything kind of crazy.
Yeah, we might as well get into it now. We were going to talk a little bit about like potentially trading up in the draft. The Athletic put out a pretty good article. It was like one of the staff articles, so it's staff writers from each bunch of different teams about the picks that are more than likely to be moved or that had the best chance of being moved in the first round come Thursday. So of course we've heard New Jersey; they've been in the mix. Ottawa is another one. The Islanders are listed here. Like actually apparently the most certain they are of a pick to be moved is actually Ottawa. For a while I thought it would be New Jersey at 2, but that seems to have cooled a little bit. The asking price, I can only imagine, is probably insane to go out and get that second round pick. We've thrown our John Gibson trade rumors that way a little bit, but I don't think there's no precedence for a top 2 pick really getting moved. I don't remember the last time that one did. I think they had mentioned it. I think it might have been like Kovalchuk with the Thrashers. I can't remember. There was an article that came out when the Devils were looking at trading it the last time, but it's been a long time. But the Sens have 7, and they're rumored to be looking for anything. They're just blowing it up this offseason. It seems like to put Colin White on waivers for a buyout.
Well, I don't even know if they're blowing it up. I think I wonder if it is that they're blowing it up, or if it's more that what they're doing is they're getting a little bit more turnover, right? This is, I believe, the first offseason since Melnick has passed away.
Yeah.
Right? He passed away during the season. So, this is the first time that he hasn't been there and been in charge of everything that's going on. And we know he was super involved. We know he was like kind of James Dolan light as far as really wanting to be involved in the decisions. I think what they're trying to do is show that what Dorian said last year wasn't as ridiculous as it maybe looked this year, and as ridiculous as a lot of people felt that it sounded right out of the gate. I don't know that Colin White is a difference maker for them, and maybe they just want to move on. They just want to free up the money, get rid of the roster space. I don't think it's going to cost them a ton against the cap.
It's like $900K.
It's just time to move on. Yeah, you know what I mean?
It's not much.
They have it. Like, it's not an issue.
Yeah.
So I wonder if it's a sign of aggression.
Yeah, they've built themselves a nice little framework where next year, assuming that they're also trying to get out of Zaitsev's deal, which isn't bad. It's 4.5, I think, for this year and next year, so it's not bad. But they're trying to get out of that. They've been trying to move Matt Murray. The rumors that they might couple him with the 7th round pick to try and get rid of him, or 7th overall pick. Those are really the only 2 big deals they have. The 6.25 for Murray and the 4.5 for Zaitsev, really the only 2 bad deals, and they're not long term. Outside of that, like, they've got a clean slate to just kind of move forward here with Tim Stutzla and Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot and Jake Sanderson. Like, they're not going to be good, and clearly, part of this probably, I would imagine, is you don't want to hear it, but tanking for Bedard or Michkov next year and setting yourself up to not necessarily be bad, but clear some of the dead weight that you don't really need, and let some young guys like Pinto can take that second line center spot potentially next year from where Colin White would have just kind of demanded it because of the money that he was making. You don't have to do that now. Maybe you go out and try and get a big free agent, but with the Sens at 7, we talked about it kind of just chatting yesterday about what the Ducks could offer for that. Like that would be my ideal spot to kind of move up to if you can get into the top 10 is around 7 to go 7, 10, and 22. I just don't know what they could offer, right? Like we don't have the enticing young top.
It would have to be Gibson. That would be what it is. They would have to decide for some reason or another. And I mean, if Peter McGuire was still involved in any way, I might be able to talk myself into a situation where, he gets into Dorian's ear or something. But I really think that's that and again, I'm just saying this, it's dramatic and ridiculous. I think you would say Gibson and then like Comtois and Terry are really the only pieces that they have that they would be interested in, right? Like, because they're obviously not trading Zegers, they're obviously not trading Pizzo, they're obviously not trading McTavish. I think it's pretty clear they're not going to trade Troy Terry. But if you're looking at pieces that would get you the first round pick this year, and Ottawa would have genuine interest in, it's those two guys, and it's not Comtois. Like, I don't think Comtois gets you a first on his own. Obviously, definitely not a lottery pick. So, it's a weird thing. Like, it almost feels like instead of trading, they'd almost be better off if there was going to be a team that reached on Lambert in the top 10. Ottawa has, I think, the most to gain from it.
Yeah. Yeah, get a trade back
they don't
and get
need,
a couple picks, right? So.
No, just fuck it. Just take him at 7.
Oh, okay.
Just take him at 7. You know what I mean? Just the talent is still there. We still believe the athleticism and the talent. We believe to be elite. We believe that we can get him on a path to kind of getting it together, putting it all together, and making him a legitimate superstar in this league. Like, I don't know that there's a better team to take that risk in the top 10.
He's going to Seattle at 4.
Dude, that would be.
I'm telling you, man. The stars are aligning for Brad Lambert to go 4 at number 4 to Seattle. I have a feeling. Just the WHL rights traded from Saskatoon to Seattle. He'll be 30 minutes down the road from Climate Pledge Arena. They can watch his development firsthand, have him at the arena, coach him through it. They're just, second season coming in. They don't have, no prospect pool outside of really Beniers right now. They've got the time to take the swing right now. Of all teams that have the time to take the swing here, it's them. Because you could argue Arizona, but they don't have the time because they're going to be playing in NCAA arena next year. Like in terms of their rebuild and the prospects they have, they probably would. But the fact that that arena they're playing, and they need somebody that's going to get there and almost for sure at least be a player for their team. Seattle has the best odds of anybody, I think, to take the real swing at 4 on Lambert, just because they don't have to. If it busts, it looks bad, but it's not a great draft. And I think you could,
But here,
it is tough.
Here's the thing about that forward.
Yeah.
Like, let's just say, right, that the first 3. Let's say New Jersey takes Juracek, right? They decide we want that cornerstone defenseman. We think it's Juracek. So it goes Wright, Juracek, Cooley. If you have Nemec and Gauthier, you have those 2 guys on the board still.
Yeah, it's
it's
tough.
Don't know how you swing for Lambert
because you banking on him having the highest upside in this draft. I'm telling you, somebody is going to like him enough and think that they can get it done. And I think Seattle is the best.
You fucking idiot. But with Seattle, you don't think it's better to walk into this season knowing we have Nemec, who is probably at worst a number 2 defenseman, number 3 defenseman, and Beniers, who is probably a number 2 center.
Oh, it's 100% better.
Obviously. I guess that's fair. You're not saying it's the right decision. You're saying it's a decision they
I
could
think
make.
it's the most likely decision of any team that has a pick currently in the top 10. The most likely one to take Lambert, I think, is Seattle. If they're gonna swing, I think that's who they're gonna
Yeah.
swing on. I don't see them, take Cutter Gauthier at 4, a swing that way. I think like if they swing, it's for the fences, and they take Lambert for all
Take
things
fucking
considered at
Nazar.
4. Yeah, I know
If you want to have
that's
somebody
a
who
different
already
swing,
had a
but
center to insulate Nazar,
Nazar
having
makes sense
Beniers,
because they both play for Michigan. You've got that connection going for you at that point. There's a lot of ways Seattle could go. I do think the draft break shakes down to Wright, Slavkovsky, and Cooley as the first 3. And that honestly makes it difficult for Seattle at 4, where you could take the defenseman, you could take Nemec and go for the highest upside defenseman in that point of the draft. To just like you said, the smart move, have a right shot defenseman and a good 2-way second line center in Beniers is like a really good structure to build from. That's the logical move for Seattle. You could swing on Nazar and hope that the connection with Beniers for Michigan, that helps them out, potential line mates in the future. Or you could just go for it and go for the guy who has the highest ceiling in this
what a
draft,
heat
Brad
check,
Lambert.
though.
And then
what a heat check pick by
it
Ron
is.
Francis.
100%. But I don't think like it is not. It's not. I don't know how to explain it. Like his WHL rights getting traded to Seattle and the rumors that he'll come to the WHL. I don't think that's major, but I don't think it's nothing, right? I think that if there's an inclination from the Kraken that he could be playing down the road, and they could have their hands on his development for that entire year, I think that means something. If you already think he's going to be that player, if Ron Francis and that team, the analytics department, scouting department, think Brad Lambert has a good chance under their development to get to the high ceiling that people expect from him, they might do it. That's all I'm saying. They might do it, because the best spot for him then would be Seattle to get the most out of him, the most out of his development, figure his game out. He goes down to a junior league, teach things, keep things simple, and he can work right directly with the Kraken being in the same city. I don't know, man. There's something about it. I know we've gotten off the rails here, but I have a feeling that if he goes high, it's 4.
Man, that's crazy. I get what you're saying. It makes sense. It doesn't make sense, but I understand how you get there. That's such a risky choice, man. Like that is like an ultimate heat check,
right? Where like when Eisman picked Seider, it was at 4 with Detroit.
I guess it would
3,
be.
And people were like, "What is going on?"
But
This guy was projected 15, 16, 20, and it worked out for them. I know it's not the same. Seider did not have the same issues as Lambert in terms of, the highest skill set, not being able to put things together and no production or whatever. He was just, a defenseman coming from a weaker league, not non-traditional drafting area. And there was concerns about, his attitude, I think, and a few different things surrounding Seider. But listen, I don't think it's going to go wild on draft day. If I was going to put money on it, I would put money on it just going normally. And it just, the top 5 guys in Wright, Slavkovsky, Cooley, Jiricek, and Nemec probably being those top 5 guys, because I think they are the 5 best players in this draft. But it would get wild. Like, if it's going to get wild, I think it's going to be wild with Lambert. That's the way I think it's going to go. I don't think we see a swing, like I said, in the top 4. I don't think we see somebody jump up that we're not expecting other than Lambert. I just can't see it. Like, some team could really, really like Nazar, but I don't see him going in the top 4. I see the top 4 shaking out like that with Slavkovsky, Wright, Cooley, Nemec, and maybe Lambert, and only at 4. That's the only place I see him going if he's going to jump.
Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I still think, the one for me that I would be a little bit more confident in somebody taking a risk would be Ottawa at 7, just because I think having Brady Tkachuk in there already, Josh Norris, Thomas Chabot, and Jake Sanderson, like they've got really solid building block pieces. I think if there was anybody, again in the top 10 who had the infrastructure, to take a swing at just a total upside pick, I think it would be Ottawa.
I think, if I if I take
They
Seattle
I mean,
out
they
of
have
the equation,
Stützle too. Shit,
yeah,
I haven't even remembered him.
yeah. If I take Ottawa out of the equation, I do think, or sorry, if I take Seattle out of the equation, I do think Ottawa is the most likely to take that swing on Lambert in the top 10. The rest of the teams, I don't know. I just, for some reason, I can't see. Like, I can't see Yzerman doing it. I can't see Buffalo doing it for what they need right now. Philly, no. The teams in the top 3, no.
Philly could do anything.
Columbus?
Philly could trade the 5th pick tomorrow for, they could trade it to themselves for Rasmus Ristolainen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's no way to know what the hell they're going to do.
Yeah, Columbus maybe, but they have the 12th pick, so I just can't see them swinging. I think they take a safer, still high upside pick at 6, and then if Lambert's there at 12, I could see them doing it at 12. But because that's a Jarmo Kekalainen might see something we don't, having his eyes on the Finnish Elite League. But in the top 10, I think it's Seattle or Ottawa. Who
Buffalo at 16, that's an interesting one.
Could do it, yeah. But anyway, okay, we were talking about trades. Where the Ducks could trade up into the first round. Ottawa maybe. Like, we don't think they have the package for that. The other teams they listed here is Edmonton, which is kind of interesting, but Edmonton's at 29. So Edmonton's been linked to as a destination potentially for John Gibson. I don't like trading him in division. I also don't like that the package is probably like Puljujarvi and the 29th overall pick and something else. Like
okay, here's my question about that, because I understand what you're saying, right? But do you think you're going to get better than a top 6 forward and a late first-round pick for a guy with that deal, that term, and the last 3 years that he has? Because as much as I am adamant he is not the guy he has been the last 3 years, it is really hard for me to make that case and not seem like a lunatic to anybody outside of Anaheim, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like, that's the thing, too. Like, if that's the best offer, though,
if it's that and then you take on Barry, right?
Yeah.
I don't know that you're going to get a better deal than that.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. Like, we talked about this with Steven. Or not with Steven, with Jason. Jesus Christ. We talked about this with Jason on the last show. If you don't get the offer that it's going to take to move him, then don't move him, right? Like, we're not at that point. We talked about that with Manson and Raquel and Lindholm at the deadline. Well, you had to move them, right? They were pending unrestricted free agents. You need to get something for them before you get nothing. John Gibson, we're not at that point. And as much as I still do believe this is the best time to trade him because you have 3 good years and then 3 bad years, you're kind of in that middle point for him. I think this is still the best time to move him. I don't think you do it if you don't get an offer that you're happy with, that kind of puts you back when you see it and say, oh man, like, we got to take this. Like, there's no way we can't take this. And I don't think, Puljujarvi, 29th pick, and lower end prospect, because it doesn't seem like they want to move Bouchard or Broberg or Bourgault or any of those guys, any of their top guys. That's not what gets you. Like, there's a desperation there, and you got to recognize that as the selling team, that you're due to get what he's worth, if not a little bit more, because of the fact that, including the FA goalies right now, he is the best goalie on the market. He just is, and you've got that term. That you can lock him down into, and the Ducks have the ability to retain some salary on that, which we talked about. So I think they're in a very good position to sell him, and they don't have to. So that, it doesn't sit well with me to get that. I think you can get better, and I think he's worth more. So I wouldn't sell him for that, even if it was the best offer.
What more do you, and again, like, this is, I guess, the question I have is, like, what more could he possibly be worth than a top 6 forward and a first round pick? Like, I don't.
It's not that, though. It's borderline that, because Puljujarvi, I think, is a middle 6 forward. Like, I think he's right now a 3rd line guy who maybe could be a 2nd line guy. I don't count him as a top 6 forward because I don't think he has 1st line potential. So I put him in that kind of middle 6 range. And that first round pick is basically a 2nd round pick, especially in this draft. It's 29th.
Okay, but here's the thing. This is the thing that annoys me, because we do this both directions every fucking year.
Yeah.
29 is basically a 2nd, but 34, 35 is basically a 1st. Mm-hmm. So either we accept that the range between 28 and, 34 is a lot more fluid and is actually a bit more of a conversation about perceived value than actual value.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. I mean, I think in the average draft, 25 to 40 is this. You're getting the same chances of getting a player. Maybe even 20 to 40 in most drafts.
mhm.
I think there's some exceptions. There are some deeper drafts where the first 30 to 35 players are at a kind of a different tier from the next ones, and it drops off there. I think specifically talking about this draft, I think there's about 40 to 45 players, and then it drops off, in my opinion, and I'm no expert by any means. So I think like the 29th pick, and the Ducks could. I trust them to get a better player at same quality player maybe at 42 than that they could at 29, and it's not a major piece. Yes, it's another swing for the fences there, but if the Ducks, for me, if they're jumping into the first round, I want to see it in like the top 15 in this draft to get another impact player. I don't want
See,
go for it.
I understand what you're saying, but I think there are some very enticing choices in that 18 to 25 range. Like, I don't think walking out with a McGroarty or a Furcus or a Bichelle, is bad. Chesley is in there. Again, if you want to be aggressive and you really think that you can get somebody with that 42 and you want to swing on Lambert, you know what I mean? Like, I don't think you need to get back into the top 15 to make a trade worth it for a first-round pick, because I do think some of the inconsistency around the rankings, some of the questions around, how good or how complete some of these players are, I think there's an opportunity to get a really good player late, a really good prospect at the very least, late in the first round. And, where'd it go? I had the thing up right now. Like, I wouldn't mind getting 24 or 25, right? Like,
Yeah.
I would be willing to trade Gibby to Minnesota for Talbot 24 and something else. Like, I don't think that's a terrible idea. I don't think 29 is the worst, obviously. Maybe you say that 20, 20 with Washington is probably your best bet. Because here's my question.
Apparently
I
moving
guess
off of 13, which is an interesting option to
Okay.
look at. I think they could be.
Well, what could Anaheim offer? That's my question. Like, because
Yeah, apparently they're looking for
If you think
either
about-
a left shot defenseman or some scoring depth at wing is what the Islanders are looking for.
so, I mean,
You
Comtois and
take some cap relief,
Fowler?
maybe, right?
Benoit. Like, I just the
The
I
Ducks
think
don't
that's
have a
the
ton
other
to
part.
offer,
It's
right?
such an
Yeah.
odd. I just think it's such an odd thing. Maybe if there's something you can trade to Winnipeg for 14, I think the best bet would be trying to get 15 out of Vancouver if you took on like Myers.
Yeah, we've talked about
But
that a little
apparently
before.
they want you to pay for Myers and not the other way around, which I don't understand because he's not
it's
good.
Vancouver.
That's
we all
yeah,
know.
but it's Jim Rutherford who's not insane. I mean, he's insane, but in a really good way. Like, I don't like it's Jim Rutherford, and I don't think what's his name, Alavin, is the first year GM in Vancouver.
Yeah.
I don't think he's stupid. Like, I
think the focus on them for right now is JT Miller, and it's going to be hard for them to talk about anything else. I know, obviously, you have multiple pans, in the fire at that point, where it's any GM,
Right.
especially in draft day. But they just locked up Besser. The next, point of discussion for them is what is going to happen with JT Miller. Are we going to move him? Or are we going to keep him around? Maybe the cap relief helps with that. That's why I'm surprised to hear they want something for Tyler Myers, like get that cap space out there, but they're trying to figure out Garland too. Like, I think they might be a team who's just like, let's just take whoever's there at 15 and we'll figure it out later. Maybe that prospect becomes a trade piece at the deadline at a different year or something like that. But they're young enough. I think they can take somebody at 15. But yeah, there's a lot of options for the Ducks to move up. I am all for getting another first, even if it's packaging, a couple of the seconds to jump up into that range. Or
22 and 42 to move up.
Yeah, Washington at 20, like you had mentioned, that's a destination for John Gibson. I really don't like the package that the Caps could put together. Whether it's like McMichael and
That's
20.
because you're a Hendrix Lapierre hater.
I didn't even include him in there. I'd rather have Connor McMichael.
Oh, I'd take Hendrix Lapierre tomorrow.
McMichael could slot in this year. I think he's really good. He had some good underlying defensive numbers. 20th overall pick isn't too bad. You might be able to package that with 22 and move up, and that would be a lot of movement on deadline day to put both of those, or on draft day to put both of those deals together. And then you get maybe like the rights to Ilya Samsonov, and you can go Samsonov and Stolars until Dostal's ready.
Yeah,
it's something, but we're scraping kind of bottom of the barrel to see what teams could do. I think that the best package you can probably still put together is from Toronto, when you're looking at maybe like Rasmus Sandin. I forget where their pick is. Their pick's at 25, I think. So that 25 pick, yeah. If it's not Sandin, then Niemela or somebody, Matthew Nyes or something like that. And of course, Nylander has been discussed at some point, but you're adding to Gibson probably to get William Nylander at that point. So I just think of teams that had the best packages available that could be interested in John Gibson, it's probably Toronto. Teams that are probably the most desperate, it's still probably Toronto, with Washington kind of right behind that. But it's going to be crazy, man. It's going to be a crazy day to see what they do.
Yeah, I guess there's always Pittsburgh.
There's always Pittsburgh. They're always
I don't know.
Yeah, they're always willing to do something. But
it's just so odd because I really don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of teams between 10 and 22 that you can make a deal with. Maybe Buffalo would be willing to trade down. But if that was the case, I think they'd probably rather trade 28 for 2 seconds instead of, 16 for a late first and a second. I don't know. It's just, assets that Anaheim could realistically be able to part with and not have to take a hit in a serious way. It's Lundestrom, Comtois, Gibson.
Yeah.
And even then, again, if you wanted to say Shattenkirk, right? I'm totally open to that. I don't think Shattenkirk gets you a first unless you're taking a contract back. Like Shattenkirk for 29 and Barrie makes sense. The salaries are pretty close to similar.
Yeah.
So I could see something like that, but I think, it might be a situation where Anaheim is trying to get picks next year, or you trade for prospects.
Yeah. You
just know prospects you want, and you just, you go, that's our guy.
Yeah, there's been rumors that what the Ducks are looking. Even in that article, the Ducks were listed as a team who could potentially move one of their first-round picks, specifically the 22nd pick. It was written by Eric Stevens saying, if there isn't a guy, if the guys that they wanted at 22 are gone, there's potential for them to move that pick for somebody a bit, a prospect that's a bit closer to NHL ready or a younger roster player already on another team. To move that 22 pick, which is another option that they could do, just because the latter half of that first round doesn't look as great as kind of the first 15 picks, that you could potentially move off that pick if you wanted to, depending on what the return is going to be. So, listen, man, they have so many different options for what they could do on draft day: trading up, trading down, adding more picks, adding prospects, moving John Gibson, moving a bunch of the other guys on the roster. Trading for bad contracts, like it's all over the place.
Would you be willing to punt on both first rounders this year for Jacob Chychrun?
Yeah,
like
probably.
If it was both firsts, Owen Zellweger and Max Comtois.
I think that the tough part is also losing Olin Zellweger. I think that's the tough part. Because you're foregoing, a defenseman with one of those picks, but Chychrun takes the spot of that. Like, listen, Chychrun is better than likely any defenseman you're going to grab at 2. The ceiling for a guy like Kuczynski is Chychrun, and Matukov is Chychrun, is what you would hope he would turn into. So you're getting that player already. So I'm fine with like 10 supplementing that. 22 is like an added piece, whatever, that's fine. Comtois, that makes sense. Zellweger's the tough one. I think I'd be more inclined to move one of the forward prospects, just because I think they're weak on D, and I would like to keep Zellweger in there as kind of the I think right now he's actually the top NHL prospect I would consider outside of in any team's pool, just based on his trajectory this year. But if it was Pastujov instead, I think I'd be a bit more comfortable with that. But it is fairly close. I mean, it's something you'd have to consider. I think, especially if it's a player like Chicken or DeBrincat or something like that, then yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we can kind of get into this right now, but if you could keep 42 in that trade, you could, theoretically look to replace Zellweger with a player like Nicholas Havlat. He's a similar player, offensive player. He's a little on the smaller side. He's, real smart, incredibly good skater. There's questions about how his size will be able to translate, but I think we're seeing right now that it's a lot easier for smaller players to get into the league and have success. And he seems to be really smart and really talented. And, what we've said about Drysdale is the same thing. If he's able to use his smarts and his skating, he can help mitigate a lot of the risk that comes with being a smaller defenseman. Mm-hmm. So I think as much as, like you said, it would suck to lose a prospect like Zellweger, I think you could find a suitable proxy. Even with a guy like Lane Hudson, right? I think there's going to be picks early in the second round that you could maybe talk yourself into being a downgrade, but still a good option in that Owen Zellweger kind of mold.
Yeah, I can see that, and I think you can get that guy in that 42 range, right? Or maybe even you package 42 and 53 to move up and grab a guy like that you like, near the end of the first round that could be going, or early second round. So I think there's a possibility there. I think Havlat is a really good option if you had to move on from Zellweger in a deal like that to bring him in. I think there is a ton of upside. They're fairly similar to when they were drafted, younger players in their draft year, 5'9", both going into their draft season, and everything else kind of checks out. The skill is there. Havlat seems to be a great defender, despite his size. Obviously, physically not winning a ton of battles because he is only 5'9". I like him a lot. Like, I'm not going to lie. I do like him. I do like that he's a right shot defenseman. The Ducks don't have a ton of dynamic right shots in their prospect pool. He has one of the better shots among defensemen in the draft, which is, again, a profile that when you look at the defensemen the Ducks have in their system, they don't really have kind of a shot-first defenseman. It's a lot of the transition past-first guys, which is fine. That's the way the NHL's trending, and Havlat can do that, but I do like that he does have kind of a refined, close to NHL-ready shot already. But again, the major drawback on him is that he's 5'9", and not many 5'9" defensemen play in the NHL. And it's tough, man,
right?
He does everything. Like, every little everything is an average or above average skill for him. Hockey sense, playmaking, compete, skating, it all checks out. But the problem is he's 5'9". You add 2 inches to that, he's probably a lock for the first round, right? He's still undersized at 5'11" if you do that, but that's the problem.
It's easier.
Yeah, but he is a guy I like
100%.
for that 42 pick if he's there. I there might be a team that swings on him. I don't think he's the guy that gets swung on for a kind of late second round pick. Like in the consolidated rankings I did, he averaged out at 37 and a half is where he ends up going. The highest he went was 25 in Elite Prospects rankings. And the lowest he went was right at the Ducks pick at 49th in Pronman's. He was ranked 49th. I think this is Pronman's middle rankings.
He here's the thing. Pronman moved him up to 25 in their most recent one today.
Yeah.
And he's got a real shot. Here's the other thing that we need to remember about potentially taking Nicholas Havlat at 42 is the Ducks would finally get to have a legacy pick because his dad played for the Ducks. And so we would be able to have the son of a former Duck on the team because the franchise is that old now. Yeah. We're almost a real franchise. So that's exciting.
I
Nick
like him.
Would be, his comparable, according to Pronman, is Sammy Vatanen. So, I think, Anaheim fans are pretty familiar with the concept of what they're getting. I don't think he's necessarily I guess, as thick, for lack of a better way to say it, as Sammy was.
Yeah.
You know, I think Sammy had a real strong base. He was able to use his body really well, despite not being the tallest guy. You know, maybe Nicholas Havlik picks up another inch and a half, gets closer to that 5'11", like we were talking about. And, you know, maybe it's a different conversation, and he puts on a little bit of weight, and he's able to leverage, again, that skating, that skill, and win puck battles before the physicality starts, you know, because I think that's what Pronman was saying, is he's really good at getting to the corners ahead of everybody and being able to avoid those kind of, you know, the situations you don't want a 5'9" defenseman in, right? Where he's got some 6'2" forward standing over the back of him, pinning him into the boards. So.
Yeah, no, I could see it. In that, in the rankings I did, there were 4 first round shouts for Matthias Havlid. So if we were looking at him at 22, 4 rankings, I guess 5 now, because Pronman, you said, had him in the first round. So he had 5 shouts as a first round pick. I want to look at another guy you mentioned at as a smallish defenseman, Lane Hutson. Could be an interesting.
Smallish.
Yeah, smallish, 5'8".
Smaller.
He's smaller than Havlin.
Yes,
But he's been listed as potentially the smartest player in the draft. You know, he's a great first pass guy, highly skilled puck handler. His skating is great. He's crafty. He's got great edge work, good agility. But again, from what it says here, like the quality of play, he's clearly an NHL quality player. But again, he's barely 5'9". He's 5'8". You know, and he's not.
Small boy mafia.
He's not an elite skater. He's a great skater. And the thing, you know, that always seems to be said is, like, you can be small, but you got to be a great skater. And if you're
right.
not both, like if you're small and you're not an elite skater, that's where the problems become in projecting you to be an NHL level player. Now, there's a lot of people who like Lane Hutson, and it's usually the more kind of analytics rankings that analytically inclined rankings we see for the draft, where they look at kind of his exit entry data and start ranking him based off that. The highest that he was ranked was 19th by Scott Wheeler, which was significantly high. And Elite Prospects had him at 49th, averaged out to around 33rd. So he'll likely be there at 22. It could be an option for the Ducks at 42. But again, you come into the same problems with Matthias Havlid. It's just the size. And I can't see the Ducks, and you know, if they don't draft a defenseman with the first 2 picks, I can't see them adding another smallish defenseman to this defense core, this prospect pool that already has Drysdale at 5'11" and Zellweger at 5'10". I just can't see a future of this team of having.
Yeah, and they're going to use one of their 7th round picks on my super small boy, which we'll get into. I'm going to make us mention him at some point.
Listen, I love these kids. I think they have all the skill in the world, and I understand that you don't have to be the 6'4" power forward or 6'5" shutdown defenseman to be in this league anymore. But it is tough.
I 100 like that. Like again, like of everybody, like I have been the most vocally critical of some of this, some of the insinuation, or even just the outright saying that size is a completely overrated part of establishing prospects. I don't think that's a fair assessment. I don't think that you can discount the reality of what comes with that added size. Now, again, you can get into situations where size is taking away from certain players. Size prevents a player from doing something. Or you get into situations where a guy is only attractive because of his size. And in his juniors, right, his junior year, his D-1, his draft year as well, he looks like a fucking stud because he's 4 years in development, like physically 4 more years developed than his peers. And so he's pushing guys around. He's not able to actually use his physicality and size in a meaningful way, but it's rather just brute force effective, kind of similar to a good Branson. You know, so I don't want to discount that fact, but I do think we are seeing. I mean, shit, Nathan Gerb is stuck in the league for 6-7 years now, at least, right? I mean, that dude. that dude might be under 5 foot, and he throws that body around like a monster. Like, he's a career third, fourth liner. I get it, but still, the fact that you can have a grinder at that size, it's a testament to the fact that if they've got the mindset, if they've got the skill, and if they've got that kind of flagrant disregard for their well-being in a productive way, you can manage to be an effective professional hockey player and be undersized. I mean, we have Braden Point, we have Sam Girard, we have these players that we can look at. The question is how far can you push that, and how high does the floor on their skill have to be?
Yeah,
I think unfortunately, the only way to know is to draft them and figure it out.
Yeah, and like the problem for me is we seem to have a blueprint now for these small forwards, right? Guys you can look at, Goodrow, Caulfield, that you can say, Braden Point, you look at and say, okay, like, they can make it. Guys can make it. They can do well, like you said. I feel like we don't have enough of guys to look at for the 5'9", 5'8", 5'10" defenseman. Sam Girard is one of them, but outside of that,
5'10" is pushing.
Yeah, 5'10". I can't think of any other top 4 defensemen 5'10" and under. I'm sure there are some, but off the top of my head, like, I'm trying to think of defensemen, right? But he's also insulated on a team that has Eric Johnson and Jack Johnson, and right, so like you can have one of those guys on your team, and I think it's fine. But when we're looking at the Ducks and projecting
Ryan Ellis at 5'10".
Yeah, okay, but yeah, and he plays the way
Ryan Ellis at one point was like legitimately one of the 15 best defensemen in the league,
and he plays like, the way that you talk about with the forwards, where he plays physical, and he doesn't play like he's 5'10", and you wouldn't notice. You wouldn't notice the way he plays, and he's a stocky 5'10" as well. He's probably like 190, 200 plus pounds, so it's a bit, you can play like that, but. Like it is tough, and I think for the Ducks it's a tough pick specifically because Zellweger's 5'10" and Dreisaitl's 5'11", and if you're hoping they make the team, can you play with 3 of these guys on your roster?
Yeah,
and imagine like you take Matejchuk at 10 or 22, and then you take Lane Hudson or Matthias Havlat at 42, and all of a sudden you've got 5 of these guys projected into your roster. Hey, who knows? Maybe it will work. Maybe that's the way of the future. The problem for me still, and I'd love to get over it, but it's just we don't have enough blueprint from the smallish defensemen that they can make it consistently to the NHL level. And I think these guys will fall because of it, and somebody might get a steal. And maybe like with 53 or whatever it is, then I'm okay, taking a swing there with that pick because it's a bit of a throwaway. And if you think they're the best player available there, then fine. But with these first 3 picks, I'm a little bit, kind of skeptical of taking them.
Yeah.
But we got some.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I was going to say just the other thing real quick is, we were talking about this the other day with Jason, where I was saying I had kind of a set of questions going into this kind of exercise, thinking about the draft. And one of them is, what if Zellweger is a bust, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, right? And again, I don't know how to push or establish the boundaries of this idea, but I wonder if you go into it saying, if we think Zellweger can do it, we think Havlat can do it, and if we think they can both do it, worst case scenario, neither one of them hits, and you deal with it. But you could pick anybody and they don't hit. Best case scenario, now we've got these 2 really dynamic defensemen that now we can look at either moving for other pieces that we may need down the line, or we figure out a way to make this shit work and we just go find 3 giants to play with these 3 little guys and we just roll them out there looking like the cell phone bars.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I just wonder what you think the upside on Havlat is that you would be willing to double dip on that 5'9" defenseman.
Yeah, and that's what it comes down to is the upside of him at that pick. Is he the best player available there by a long shot that you can overlook the size? And so I guess we just go Bichelle at 10, Pickering at 22, and then you can take Havlat at 42 because you took 2 6'5" monsters with your first 2 picks. So, but yeah, let's talk about those guys. We're on the theme of defensemen at 22. So one of the bigger defensive-minded defenseman is Swiss defenseman Leon Bichel. Really like him a lot for what he could potentially be. He, for a guy that's 6'5", same with Pickering as well. Normally, the profile for those guys is they can't skate at all, and it's all about defense and they're physical and they're gritty. Bichel's actually a really good skater, especially for 6'5". He's
Very
really
strong skater for his size.
Yeah, he's really raw player. Like he needs to refine a lot of his skill set still. The offense is likely something that won't project at the NHL level, which is fine. I mean, kind of what you're getting with this guy is a guy who can play hard, compete hard, and is going to be a shutdown defenseman for your team. And is going to be tough to play against. But it does project well, and I think he's climbed up a lot of people's boards again, just because he does have some ability to carry the puck up the ice. He does have significantly better skating than you would expect from a guy at his size. He's got some playmaking instincts to them, and this the reach and the ability to close gaps, and that physicality just kind of takes him up another level, right? So I think the main thing with him, he has to get more comfortable when he's on the puck. He looks a little bit rushed sometimes. The offense doesn't it doesn't come easy to him yet, which is fine. I mean, it's something you expect from a guy who's probably focused on being a shutdown defenseman for most of his career. But he is a guy, I think when you look at potential future partners with Jamie Drysdale, you never want to draft like that, but that would be the type of guy you'd probably want to play with him, right? A guy who can still skate well for his size, is bigger, is going to play physical, is going to create space.
Wait. I want to go back to what you just said. Why don't you want to draft that way? And I'm being genuine with this.
Yeah.
What is wrong with looking at a player and saying, I think this player can be the second half of my top pair. They can be dynamic. They can skate well. Why is that something you... I'm not trying to be funny. It sounds like I'm a smart ass, but I don't...
Yeah,
you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think the better way to say it is I wouldn't reach on him over 3 or 4 guys to draft him specifically because you think he'd be a compliment for Jamie Drysdale. Now, if he's still one of your best players available at that spot, and then you're also considering the splitting decision is that you think he'd be a really good comparable player for Jamie Drysdale, then I'm fine with that. But I wouldn't draft anybody well out of where you think they are in terms of best player available at that spot just because you think they'd be a good player, a good comparable fit there. If there's 4 or 5 guys above your list at 22 and Bichel is well below those guys, I take the guy near the top of your list, and you can make the argument at that point with the same thing. Are they going to be a comparable center for this team? Are they going to be a good winger for Zegras or McTavish? And you can do that with any of these guys. So yeah, I definitely think it's okay to have that as a consideration, but definitely not for me a reason to reach well above where you think he'll go.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think that's a really good way to think about it. And it's one of those things because we were kind of talking about it with Jay, and then I was listening to last week's athletic podcast where Pronman and Boltman were going over Pronman's 7-round mock. And one of the things that they were talking about is the difference between drafting for need and drafting best player available, and kind of, what teams are in a position to draft for need and still actually be looking at best player available and things like that. And they were talking about how your drafting projection, right? You're drafting for need in 4 years, 3 years, 5 years. You're not drafting for need the next season.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that in the same way with fit. For example, right? You have a guy like Rucker McGordy, which you look at and you could say, okay, that's a big-bodied winger. That's a guy who can score goals. He's smart defensively. He gets into open areas. He creates space. That sounds like a perfect guy to go play with Trevor Zegras. You know what I mean? And now you can – I don't think that's a bad way to look at that pick. I think you could, again, just as easily say that maybe there are other players that you would have higher there. But if he's one of those guys for you, I think it actually can be considered a benefit to go – well, that guy, we actually have a spot for him already. It's not we think he can be great and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
So it's we think he can be really, really good, and we know where and how we can use him. That's kind of what we talked about a little bit with Nazar. Like, I honestly, part of me doesn't even think Nazar ever plays center. Like, I would honestly be drafting him to play McTavish wing, but I think he has first line potential.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's you know what I mean? It's not drafting for a guy to play with this guy. I don't think this guy's a center at the next level. And I also think he's the perfect winger to play with someone like McTavish, who plays that heavy game, who would be the beneficiary of Nazar being aggressive on the perimeter, getting into the inside, making those kind of slick passes.
Yeah, drawing two defenders, creating space, right? So
exactly. Yeah. So
I'm definitely down for that.
Yeah. Are there any, I guess, late second, late first, early second guys that you are especially interested in, or anybody even later than that?
Yeah, I wanted to, because we're talking about the bigger guys, to go from Bichelle to Pickering as well and talk.
Oh,
about
yeah. Sorry.
No problem. Like for Bichelle, just
the
wanted
other guy...
to put it out there. He's ranked as high as 15 on Pronman's board, but this was before the most recent one, so he could be a little bit higher, he could be lower. He's ranked 19th on the Hockey News, and as low as 51 on Scott Wheeler. So again, like for him, it's the offense. How much does that matter to you? He's going to be probably at worst a third pairing defenseman, but he could be a little bit better if the offense comes into play. I think that shows in the rankings. So he's a guy that you could take a swing on at 22 if you really like him, but there's also a chance he's there at 42 and maybe even at 53, depending on how far he falls, right? It's just it's like that with these guys, and there'll be a lot of teams who see the upside's not there, and that the offense probably won't come for a 6'5" defenseman, so they'll be taking some swings as with their second picks that maybe they didn't do in the first round, were a bit safer in the first round, and start taking swings, and he starts falling a bit. So there's a good chance that he could potentially be there with any of the three later picks that the Ducks have outside of the number 10.
Did Maverick Lamoureux show up on your consolidated rankings? Because he's another one that I've seen taken as high as 22 for the Ducks, and he's exactly a guy like that, where he's a big defenseman. He's got that nastiness to him. He plays his gaps well. He's not as strong a skater as Pickering or Bichelle are, but he plays. He plays pretty well for his size and is able to leverage his size to make up for that.
Yeah, he was a guy that was all over the place, like literally in the rankings. Right. And again, a lot of it is we talk about 5'9" and 5'8" defensemen not having a blueprint of success in the NHL. The same can be said for 6'7" defensemen, and not having a long track record of them actually panning out. Sometimes getting drafted a lot higher than they should have. Tyler Myers, and not actually panning out to that level at the NHL level. The highest Lamoureux was ranked was 30th on the Hockey News. That was his only first-round shout of any of the 15 rankings. He had ranked at 39, 43, 44, 57, 61, 59. The lowest he was ranked was by Smart Scouting at 111th. It was a shout for 85 in there from Scott Wheeler. So it is really kind of all over the place, anywhere from late first, second round pick, potentially as far as the fourth round in some cases here. So, and I think that he could go anywhere on draft day, because again, it's a cliche saying, but all it takes is one team to really like this guy and take him. Somebody's going to really like that. He's a 6'7" defenseman who has some skill and is a decent skater for his size, that they'll reach on him and take him. I do think he probably goes second or third round, though.
Yeah, Jersey did that last year, right? They took it in the middle of the first round with like a 15th or 16th overall pick that I think some people had as far as the fourth round on their board.
Yeah.
It wasn't Chinikov. It was.
Yeah, I remember Columbus taking.
I can't remember his name. I'm not even going to try to. But yeah, so you're 100%, like you were saying. All it takes is one team to throw everything, overboard, and change it. And then that's interesting too, because then you get into that point where like we've all experienced this doing fantasy sports, is like one person takes a guy a little earlier than everybody was expecting at a certain position, usually like a quarterback or some shit like that. And now all of a sudden there's a run and everybody's like, oh, okay, we're just going to all get this guy now. It can happen that same way with position types as far as, looking for big defensemen, maybe looking at the goal scoring wingers who are a little bit incomplete, but that goal scoring upside is high. You know what I mean? So you have those kinds of runs on player profiles that you can get. And, exactly all it takes is one guy to change the whole trajectory of the draft.
Yeah, it was Ottawa, by the way, last year.
So-
They took Tyler Boucher at 10.
Okay. I thought New Jersey took somebody
They
too.
probably did. It wasn't last year because New Jersey had one of the higher picks, I believe, because they took was it Holtz last year? Oh no, that was a different year. But yeah, I looked back at 2021 entry draft. Boucher was the one last year specifically that set a lot of people off. He was ranked as like third round guy, and the Sens took him at 10. Not looking like it's panning out for them, unfortunately, but that's the Sens.
Shocking.
Yeah. Owen Pickering. I want to talk about him before we move on away from the big boy defenseman.
Yeah.
He's like Bichelle in a sense, the size. He's 6'5". Better skater, better offensive instincts. There's still, again, he's still a bit raw on some of his games, like a lot of the taller defensemen are, and working on kind of the puck handling and the stick skills a bit. But he is getting a lot of love for kind of a rising pick. I think he's been the highest riser on a lot of people's boards just from a really great second half of the season. I have him here as high as 13 on Cam Robinson's board. Elite Prospects has him at 15. FC Hockey has him at 19. Hockey News has him at 16. Recruit Scouting has him at 15. Dauber at 19. Sportsnet at 21. So he's got 13 first round votes out of 15 rankings I looked at. The only ones where he fell out were Scott Wheeler, for some reason, had him at 53, which is wild, and Smart Scouting had him at 33. Everybody else had him as kind of a mid to late first round pick. So he's a good shout for Anaheim at 22. I think that's likely, if they were to get him, is where he would fall. I could see him going sooner for sure to a team like Columbus or Buffalo who have 2 picks within kind of the first 15 or 16. But I do really like him if the Ducks go forward at 10. He's probably my ideal choice for the Ducks to take at 22 if they're going to take a defenseman, if he's there. That's what I would hope for. But again, I talked about a little bit earlier, and why I'm a little bit hesitant on the Ducks taking forward at 10 is because he's likely going to go. Bichelle could go earlier, and then these types of guys aren't going to be available there. Then you're looking at some of the smaller guys that we talked about. But man, like he is, he's looking like a real good player. One of those late risers that really pans out. A guy who just started to kind of figure things out. And I think he's in for a pretty dominant season next year. And for a guy with his size, he carries the puck well. Yeah, he controls zone exits, zone entries at a level that you don't expect from a guy of his size to be able to do. And again, defensively, he just has everything kind of figured out already at this level. And again, a lot of that comes from being basically a man at 6'4", playing against kids in junior. But everything projects well for him to potentially be a top 4 defenseman. And we talk about fits again. He does seem like a guy that can be able to be a future pairing with Jamie Drysdale. If a bigger guy who physically can create space for Drysdale to be able to do his thing, but also can skate well enough that he can keep up with him, right? Join the rush every now and then. Maybe swap out and be the guy who ends up carrying the puck up the ice because he does have the skill to do that. So I like him a lot. I do like him for 22, even if the Ducks do take a defenseman, even if they take a Kuczynski or Matukov at 10. If he's there at 22, he is one of the better players that would be available there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think not any one of those three, because I still think Lamoureux at 22 would be a reach. But I would be perfectly fine with Pickering, Bichelle, or even Chesley at that 22 spot. I think you could get a strong defensive defenseman there. I think there's some opportunities a little later. Like I think, what's his name? Isaiah George from London. He plays with a little bit of bite to him. He's not as big, obviously, but he's not small. He's 6'1". He plays with some bite. He's a guy that you could see playing next to Drysdale in the future. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating that the Ducks are at 10 and 22 because of who could fall into the early second and the fact that if you take a forward at 10, you're getting a potentially flawed defenseman at 22 because some of the more complete players might go ahead of you. And the same thing can be said if you take a defenseman, you're going to end up with, a guy like McGroarty who doesn't have great skate, who doesn't have great foot speed. A guy like Jagger Firkus maybe, who, he's the smallest 5'10" player you've ever seen in your life. Like, the kid weighs 50 pounds. So you get these guys that have these kinds of question marks. And I think, to your point, this is one of those things where trying to get another top 15 pick without giving up 22 would be huge, because then you could go after a guy like Bichelle, take a forward at 10. Owen Pickering and Liam Bichelle, Corey Pronman has Bichelle as kind of a Keandre Miller comp as far as his ability to be an effective skater and use his reach at that size to be a good defenseman. I think Keandre Miller, surprised some people as far as how quickly he became NHL ready. I don't know necessarily that it would be fair to expect that of Leon Bichelle, but the idea that that's kind of the general direction you can see Bichelle going, I think is very promising, and certainly enough, in my opinion, to justify drafting him in the late first round. I don't know, I think there's no way that you reach it at 10, right? Like, he's just not that guy.
Yeah.
But I would trade 22 and 42 to get up to like 16, 17 if you think that's what you have to do to get him. I think he's a good enough player, and the upside is high enough that you could justify trading 2 picks to move up to get him. Yeah. Especially when Anaheim has this, bevy of second-round picks next year, they have the second-round pick this year. They've got a couple of other late picks, and I'm sure they can find other ways to get creative and find more picks.
Yeah, we talked about earlier in the show is having that draft capital. Is if you like a guy a lot and you can move up 5 spots to get him, it's only going to cost you one of those second-round picks. With the depth of the prospect pool that you have now, you might as well do it to swing on a guy that you think is going to be that difference maker, right? It's nice to have that cover. That, you have 2 second-round picks this year. So if it is 22 and one of the 2 seconds that you move, you still have a second-round pick to grab another player at that level. Or you move one of the 3 second-round picks that you have next year to do that, and then you've got some cover as well there. So it does, and like Verbika's already said, he has options now because of that. They built up these draft picks, and they're not going to keep all of them. If they don't have to, they're going to explore trades to move up or to move the picks just outside of the draft and go and get some younger players to fill out the roster that can step in right away. So they've got the ability to be flexible like that and move up if there's a guy they really like.
How valuable do you think that Boston 23 second can be perceived as being, because of the uncertainty around that team and whether or not they'll be able to be competitive in what is an incredibly hard division with some legitimate uncertainty in the roster? I know Bergeron is coming back, and that should be a big plus for them, but at the same time, they're going to be without more than a few key players for a good amount of time, and Bergeron could fall off the cliff tomorrow. Like, he could just not be that guy next year.
Yeah.
And if he's not, I don't think that team has the talent to get around that.
It's Boston.
It's just
our pick and Colorado's pick we have in the second, I think, right? For next year.
I think we all expect
Yeah.
Anaheim's to be, between 33 and 42 like this year, and Colorado's to be between, what would that be, 64 and 58.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I would say it holds more value than Colorado's, and maybe a little bit less value than ours. I think you put it right in the mix there. But again, and some teams value all second-round picks the same or close to it. There's obviously some benefit to having a pick 20 picks ahead of where that Colorado pick is likely going to be. But I do think it holds more value than it did being a Boston pick, with Bergeron.
At the time of the trade.
Yeah, with Bergeron. I think he's coming back, but with some of the situations that have developed in Boston, the coaching change and everything, that I think it has more value than it did before. So there could be a team that says, hey, I like that pick next year better than I like Boston's pick, or not Boston's, Anaheim second this year, or Pittsburgh second this year. They like that one a little bit better for next year because next year's a bit of a deeper draft. So I could definitely see those seconds next year holding more value, and potentially the Ducks having to package one of those to move up rather than one of their seconds this year, just because of the way the drafts shape out. But yeah, I'm open to it, man. Like if again, I trust this scouting staff the way they've drafted over the last 3 drafts. to go out and get a guy that they really like and have full trust that that guy's going to pan out, because it's worked pretty well so far. Specifically, the last 3 drafts have been excellent for the Ducks.
So, given that we do indeed feel like the Anaheim's drafting process has borne some pretty solid fruit, to whatever extent that the three of the top 10 picks are going to be what they are because they're top 10 picks. Just thinking about the late first, the seconds, etc., and then Anaheim has a track record of pulling guys in later rounds, whether that's Troy Terry, whether that's Josh Manson, whether that's even lesser players like Chris Wagner, who are able to come in and fill a role, things
Andre
like that.
Cascio, I guess,
Right, exactly. There you go. Thank you. It's a much better example than fucking Chris Wagner. But I given that is how we kind of feel about their ability to find value as the draft goes on. But Pat Verbeek just fired Marchand from player development.
Mm-hmm.
Are we maybe more confident in theory or more optimistic about the franchise's ability to develop those same types of, late round gems or mid round gems? Or is it more of we have no idea, we just know that the scouting staff does a pretty good job of finding guys?
Yeah, I mean, we won't know, right, until and it's hard to put the blame on who, right, is again, or who gets the credit for it. I think it's split. Todd Marchand definitely gets credit for developing those players over the last couple of years, but the scouting department gets credit for finding them and recommending that they draft them at that point. Then again, the player themselves for the commitment and the compete to get to that point and the development in their game. So it's tough to judge how much impact that's going to have on the Ducks' ability to develop players. I think with or without Todd Marchand, they really do seem to have a strategy of developing players, and what they did with Zegras and what they've done with McTavish. We'll see what they do with Zellweger, but there's a slow and steady process of introducing guys to the NHL level gradually, and then working them into their preferred position at a point where they feel that they're comfortable with getting there. And that seems to be the blueprint that they're taking right now, with or without Marchand in the team. So I do have confidence in the fact that the scouting department will do their best and have done their best at finding the right players. And even without Marchand, I think the Ducks do now have a blueprint, whether that's been set by Marchand and will continue to move forward with that blueprint of how they should develop these guys and how they should bring them along.
So, I think that's fair. I think it's really hard to know, and I think the development part of it is going to be a question mark. And at this point, you can just say we feel we're pretty confident that the scouting staff is going to identify players with legitimate potential. Whether or not they make it is always a crapshoot. Most of them don't. There are 2 things I wanted to ask you as far as just kind of things looking at with making picks maybe in later rounds or even with that later first. The first is, we talked about this a little bit with Brad Lambert. Do you think, do you think there is a benefit or an incentive to draft European players maybe in the second round because they don't fall under the juniors rule and they can come play in San Diego? Like, would you be more inclined to take a European player, like all things being roughly equal, right?
Yeah.
Would you be more inclined to take a European player so you could get them into the AHL team, get them down the road? Or do you think that it doesn't make much of a difference either way because the juniors route we've seen be successful, and you can always just draft, you can always work on the kids even while they're down there?
Yeah, I think it definitely comes into play when, like you said, all things are considered equal. If you value both prospects the same, being able to have the ability to get a guy over sooner can be a bit more intriguing. Not having to wait as long to be able to see him at the pro level, that he gets that adjustment to the pro game or the North American game earlier. I think it can be incentivizing. I think the thing we have to remember, too, for a lot of these European players is that a lot of them do have contracts with those teams. Now, they are easy sometimes to get out of. They're not the same level as the KHL. But there are some players who just honor those contracts most of the time from the European players, unless they are able to make the NHL roster right off the bat. We see them stay over in Europe for the next season anyway, sometimes two. And at that point, you're almost on the same level as the CHL player, right? In the sense that when we draft, whoever from the CHL, these guys are 17, 18, and they've likely got 2 more years of eligibility, maybe 3 at the CHL, depending on how long they've been there, before they can move to the AHL anyway. So you're getting roughly around the same time. But I think, it depends on how early you think that prospect can come over and play in North America. If you think he's ready now, and you think based off what you've seen from him, he can make that jump to the program next season, you can bring him in, or let him go back to Europe for 1 year and then bring him over in that second year. And at least you've accelerated the process a bit. I definitely think there is something to it to have that option sooner, rather than knowing you have to wait the 2 to 3 years for the CHL player to be able to get to just the program, to the AHL level. We've seen that so many times. McTavish this year, right, where didn't feel like he felt like he was a bit NHL ready, but didn't really need wasn't really going to stick around. Couldn't go down to the AHL, so he had to go back. The Leafs, when Mitch Marner was tearing up the Ontario Hockey League with the London Knights, felt like he was probably not ready for the NHL, but there was no chance they were going to send him back down to junior. Probably would have been better for them at the time, they felt, to send him to the Marlies, but they couldn't. So you run into that situation a lot. Worked out. They brought him to the NHL, and he popped off and did great. But, you're always going to run into that situation with the junior players. So I for sure it weighs on the decision, especially depending on what your timeline is for your rebuild and when you want this guy in the lineup.
So, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And it's actually funny now that I was thinking about it, because Brad Lambert was the guy that we were using as an idea of why this might be beneficial, and then he just has his fucking rights traded to the WHL.
Yeah, he would fall under different rules, luckily, for anybody who wants to draft Lambert, because he's coming over from Europe, so he doesn't apply to the same homegrown rules that the CHL applies to.
Interesting.
So he could go and play in Seattle next year, and then play in the AHL the year after that if they wanted him to, because he's I believe he would still fall under Europe as a Euro import, essentially, because Seattle or Saskatoon drafted him into the CHL as an import player. So he wasn't drafted through the CHL draft. He was drafted through the import draft. So he kind of escapes that, which is nice. We've seen that from a lot of the Euros who come over to Svechnikov. He ended up playing right in the NHL, but he would have been subject to those rules. Jan Misak, who plays with McTavish and Hamilton, is subject to those rules because he was brought over in the import draft. So any of those guys, who come into the import draft, they don't have to go through that whole 4 years of eligibility process. It's only if you're drafted into that league through the actual CHL draft, I believe. Which is nice.
That makes sense.
It does
it
help
would
out
be
a
a
little
different
bit.
process for different people.
Yeah. The Euros get a slight advantage. So
the other question I wanted to ask you, and I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot or any of that shit, and we don't have to get into the underlying bullshit. Would you take a Russian in the top 50 picks?
I'm surprised
with the
we didn't get into
uncertainty
this,
that we know
on the last pod. We talked about it at the time. Yeah,
I just
the whole
because
Fedotov
who is
situation.
it? Is it Yurov is the one who's over here already?
No, Mintyukov is already here with Saginaw in the OHL.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
There you go.
it's
It was one of those forwards.
Yurov and Miroshnichenko, who are the guys who were at one point seemed like locks for the top 10. Now they're both kind of sitting around.
Miroshnichenko had the health issues, and then on top of it, they both have the Russian issues.
Miroshnichenko was like a top 5 guy, and then the health issues brought him outside the top 10. And now with the whole thing in Russia, there's a chance he doesn't even go in the first round. Yurov, he got to play the whole season, so he's still kind of in the conversation around 10, 15, 20. But he could even fall out now with that whole Igor Fedotov with the Flyers, the goaltender who was arrested because they felt like he signed with the Flyers because he was avoiding, serving from the Russian military. That's gonna play into it for sure. I think there's some teams who have 2 firsts who could take a swing when Miroshnichenko and Yurov start falling. Buffalo or Columbus or somebody like that could take him. Anaheim again, like maybe at 22, if you feel like that guy on your list normally was going to be a top player. But the weird thing with the Russians this year is, I think Bob McKenzie put this in his rankings, is that some teams in their scouting departments are ranking all the players together. Some of them have a list of everybody else and a list of the Russians separately. Some teams aren't even ranking the Russians. They're basically acting like they're not even in the draft, and they're not even going to worry about it. So it's going to be we won't know until draft day. It's going to be a strictly team-by-team basis. Some teams won't even touch them, no matter where they are at any point in the draft. They just don't want to have to deal with that hassle of bringing guys over. So yeah, it's always the Russian factor is always a thing, but it's escalated this year in the sense that like it could cause a lot of guys, especially not so much Yurov and Miroshnichenko. I think somebody will take them, but the guys who would have gone, second, third, fourth, fifth round, they might not even get drafted because of this whole situation here, where it's not worth the risk and the wait to see if they're going to ever come over at that point. You know, a lot of teams I think are going to feel like they're wasting draft picks on drafting like Galimov, like the Ducks did last year in I think the fourth round. I don't think we're going to see too many of those picks.
Kislamov, let's go.
We got him before the issues, so now we still have to wait a couple of weeks before he comes over.
I just need him to come over here because that kid rocks.
Yeah.
He's so much fun. Whatever. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really interesting because I think the uncertainty can, depending on how you want to look at it, be both over and understated, right? Like the whole situation could go even more sideways at any given point, and then the whole thing's completely thrown, or the whole thing could end up being all for naught or whatever, right? But it is interesting because I had just recently watched the Russian 5 documentary. Shout out to Chip, who told me to watch it. She's very smart. We love Chip. But in the thing, the guy who was the GM of the Detroit Red Wings started taking risks on drafting Russian players who typically fell very late in the draft or didn't get drafted at all because it was just like, well, they're not going to get out of the Russian army, so like whatever. And I wonder if in 15, 20 years, if we see any kind of, similar parallels as far as smart teams being able to take advantage of players who fell into the second or third rounds that maybe should have been top 25, top 20 picks. I think that 42 pick is right around where I would be like, okay, these guys are falling. Let's really look at grabbing one of these guys, because if they fall that far, the value is insane at that pick.
Yeah,
because the odds are the second round pick isn't going to make it either way.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like the odds are a second round pick isn't going to pan out. So if you can get a guy like that, right, one of those kids that's actually got legitimate first round potential, like when you see it.
Yeah.
I think, that would be too hard to pass up.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like we talk about Lambert falling, but it's because of the skill set and not being able to put it together. Like these guys are falling for no hockey reasons whatsoever.
Fault of their own.
Not even any personal reasons. Like it's political reasons that they're falling. I think at 42, if Miroshnichenko or Yurov are there, you take them and you run. And like you said, like if it busts at that point, whatever, it's a second round pick. A lot of times they don't pan out anyway. If it hits, you're talking like Kucherov in the second round, right? Like that's what I don't think they're going to be as good as Kucherov, but that's the swing on type of a Russian player.
Oh, they're not going to be a hard trophy candidate?
Yeah, maybe Kucherov isn't the best example because I believe he played in the QMJHL anyway. But yeah.
It's still, I get what you're saying.
Yeah,
what
take
you're
the swing
talking about
at
is a
that
value
point.
player.
If
absolutely.
any of them are there at 42, I'm taking them. I take Miroshnichenko over Yurov, but I would take either of them at that point. I think Yurov's comp is Troy Terry, according to Pronman, I think it is, or Wheeler, and then Miroshnichenko was compared to Gabriel Landeskog. So if you can get a guy like that with those comps,
God, I would be so happy with a Landeskog.
Yeah, it's
oh my God, I love Landeskog.
They are too
so
good
happy.
to fall that far. They both should be top 15 picks, but they likely won't because of this whole situation. So if you can get them, even at 22 in a normal year, that's a steal to take one of those guys there. But at 42, like that's just you can't pass that up. I'm glad you brought that up because we forgot to talk about those guys on the last one. So
yeah, and who are the other defensemen that are in that? Because it's is it Matichuk and is it Matichuk part of this?
For the what?
Or is he playing for the there's a couple of defensemen that are over there.
Oh, the Russians?
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
no,
I can't remember who
Matichuk's
it is.
Canadian. The Russian, like Manchurikov, but he's over here, and I can't remember who the Russian. I know there's another forward. Isn't it like Gleb Trekikov or something?
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy that's
Okay.
been ranked anywhere from 15 to like 50 because of the whole Russian situation. It's a lot of Russian
Right.
forwards this year. I know that will affect Michkov next year, right? Like that will be something that could as Bedard probably deserves number one overall in his own right, but imagine how that's going to affect that race next year. It's supposed to be Bedard and Michkov, and now it's probably just going to be
Right.
Bedard, right? Like, not outside of merit because he deserves it, but because like nobody's going to want to take the risk on Michkov, and two, they're going to have to wait 2 years anyway because he signed a new KHL contract, so he's got to wait.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just it's a really fascinating draft for Anaheim right now. I think for a number of reasons, it's a really fascinating draft for a lot of teams. Teams didn't finish where they want to. Teams took big swings that didn't pay off. All sorts of stuff like that. But I think it feels silly because I keep feeling like I'm getting my hopes up for no reason, and then at the same time, I can come up with 3-4 reasons off the top of my head about why we could actually see some real movement ahead of the draft. And
Yeah.
Ryan McDonough getting traded doesn't hurt that either, as far as feeling like there's really something there this year.
Yeah, things are going to happen. I can't. I need it to happen already. I need the draft to go through. I need the first couple of rounds and any trades to happen because I hate the speculation eats away at me on what could happen and what the Ducks could do. Like this is the time of year where I start diving into like 1,000 different mock drafts and looking at who could go where and who would be the best fit. And I can't. It's eating at me. For anybody sticking around, we still have the forwards to get to that could go at 22. So if just so you know, like we're in it for the long haul for this one. We got some forwards we got to look at, a few more defensemen to profile, and then we wanted to talk a little bit about some of our guys we like later in the draft. You had a few guys that you really like that could be kind of late round picks on who the Ducks could take a swing with. So. But there's a couple defensemen I want to talk about, 3 specifically that we could get around like the 22, maybe 42 is a stretch range. The first 2 are the 2 USNTDP defensemen, Ryan Chesley and Seamus Casey, or as Jason would say, Seamus Casey. So Chesley I like a lot. He's not profiled like it, but for some reason he reminds me of Charlie McAvoy, like a smaller-ish guy. He's 6 foot. But he's like a stocky 6 foot, 200-pound guy. Really just a shutdown elite defensive defenseman, which you don't again see usually from a guy around his size. Really great skater, strong on his skates, great edge work, great straight line speed, acceleration, high character guy, high compete player. And everybody's saying he'll be a shutdown defender at the NHL level. The only problem is there's some speculation and debate on the offensive upside. He seems to have the tools to be a good playmaker, but he just doesn't really take charges of play. Like he relishes in being a shutdown defender. He likes to do that. I think there's a project there for sure. But he's a right shot defenseman, 6 foot. He's not too small. I really like him as a potential option. The Ducks need some right shot defensemen. And again, we talk about comparables. You think of a guy who could potentially play with an Olin Zellweger to bring the best out of his ability, a guy who loves to just rush up the ice. You've got another guy who can, one, keep up with you and is still, on the smaller end, but is just an elite defender and uses his skating to be, to his advantage to be that elite defender. It's not all about size with him. I really like that potential kind of pairing in the future. A guy who could maybe fit with, an aging Cam Fowler potentially and work his way into the league that way.
Yeah, no, I love Chesley. I think he is he's really interesting to me, right? Because this is one of those things where I find my natural instincts kind of fighting with the general kind of wisdom of what to do in the draft and what players you're taking where. the idea that he could be a legitimate shutdown top 4 guy, to me, is enough to take him in the late first round, because those guys are really hard to find. The fact that he can skate, so he's got that modern ability, but he plays with some physicality despite, not being the biggest guy. He does play with some physicality. He does play with some of that bite. And the idea that you can see where he fits in going forward, right? Like, you can project a spot for him. And for me, I just love the idea of bringing one of those guys in and just having him be developed and kind of brought along in the program. I think you could make the argument that you would be leaving a little bit of meat on the bone at 22 as far as upside picks. But I don't think that should count against him as far as what his actual upside is, because I do think we tend to undervalue how important just being really good at playing defense can be. I think, it feels ridiculous to say this, but I think we could look at him as a hopeful right-handed Devin Taves, right? Where what you've got is this guy who has the skating, has the smarts to keep up, has the skill level to keep up with one of these smaller, faster, more dynamic offensive defensemen. But at the same time, he's going to play responsibly. He's going to be able to track back. He's going to be able to stop plays in the neutral zone, even before they develop and they get going the other direction. So I think Ryan Chesley is a great pick. I think there's a lot to like there about him and what he could project to be. And I think even if his upside is only as high as a second defenseman, I don't think that's nothing. Like, that means something.
Yeah.
And I think those are the kind of players you should be looking to get.
Yeah.
They're certainly a guy you hope falls to 42, but I don't think that's realistic.
Yeah, for him, he looks like a guy. I mean, I just checked it. I had to double check. He was ranked in the first round 12 out of the 15 drafts that we looked at rankings. So he is a guy that's likely going to go. The highest he was 14th for the Hockey News, 20th for FC Hockey, but around that 22 to 30 range seems to be where he was kind of falling more often than not. And again, a lot of that was just, again, due to the fact he is only 6 foot, so he's right on that kind of cusp of being NHL size, or what most scouting and teams deem as NHL ready size by a defenseman. It's just the offensive upside and what he's going to bring there. But I think when you talk about an elite skater and an elite defender as a right shot defenseman, and he seems to have the skills to at least be an average NHL defenseman offensively. He just doesn't utilize it. Like, I think that's something you look at and say, we can work on that. We can.
It's Brock Faber, right? Is what we're doing. It's a similar pick to Brock Faber.
Yeah, in a sense, they both come from the same program. They're both taught to play the same way. They're both smallish, right shot, quick, good defending defensemen, and then the offense is the question mark there. So I think it is a pretty good comp to look at that as a guy. And if he figures out the offense and can be a 20, 30 point guy with all that, everything else still intact, you're looking at a pretty good swing if you get him at 22. So I like him a lot. And the other guy we're going to mention before we move on to the forwards, other NTDP defenseman, was Seamus Casey. It was not really the complete opposite. Still a great skater, but more of the offensive defenseman, and the defense is the question. And it's not that he can't play defense. It's not like a whole Kevin Korchinski or Matuyakov situation. It's that he's 5'10", and that like Haviland and like Hudson, there's that concern of you're not an elite skater and you're only 5'10". What is your role at the NHL level? You're good offensively and you've got good offensive instincts, but what's he going to do? How's that going to translate out of that junior level to the NHL level? And I think that's what kind of reflects in his rankings is he's averaged out at 38.5, but that's mostly because Scouting had him at 12 on their ranking. Had a few other late first shouts around 27, 25, 32, but it seems like if the Ducks were going to get him, he'd be around 42 is where he'd be there. I don't mind him there because I think there's enough upside, but again, it comes down to the size. Being 5'10" as a defender and not having, the elite skating that somebody like Zellweger does, it makes you kind of hesitate taking that swing.
Yeah, here's the thing. I honestly didn't have a ton on Casey as far as knowing much about him. I just knew that he was a meaningful player for the USNTDP. But it says here that he's from Miami, which means we need to draft him because they don't make people in Miami like they don't make them anywhere else like that. Like I would draft if Matthias Havlin was from Miami, I would take him with the 10th pick. Like I don't think we can underestimate they just make them different down there, man. Like it's just a different breed. Like it's the best. Like
Didn't
I
Kiefer
am
Sherwood
all in on this
play
pick.
for the University of Miami, or was that somebody? Is that Cole?
Yeah, but he played for the University of Miami, Ohio, which is not the same thing.
Oh, it's okay. Okay, never mind.
There's a Miami in Ohio, which, just for the record, you and every college football fan under 15 does get confused about that, including myself at some point. And I was like, why are there two Miamis? And why is one of them
is
so
one of
much
them
cooler
in
than the other?
Ohio? That's like
Yeah,
complete
exactly.
opposite. That's rough. Any other defensemen you wanted to talk about at potentially 22, kind of second round stretch before we move on to the
No,
forwards?
I don't think so. I think Michelle Pickering. I mean, we kind of touched on Lamoureux.
Yeah, we didn't talk.
We hit on Havlin. I think,
Calais
yeah.
Odelius was kind of just the only reason I didn't talk about him is like there aren't many of them this year. There usually are like 4 or 5 of them. He's just the prototypical Swedish defenseman, which is nothing wrong with that. But he's just your average sized, good skater, great two-way defenseman. He's got some offensive upside. We hear about that every year, and like I hate it because he is really good. He's getting some shouts for like around 15 and whatever, but there's just like that stereotype around Swedish defenseman. It's like, yeah, he's a really good, useful defenseman. He's gonna play in the NHL. He's gonna be like a 4-5, and yeah, that's what what you're gonna get with him. And like it sucks because it's just like it's a boring profile because we've heard it like 1,000 times.
Yeah, man. I mean, I've told this to you multiple times. Like, I look at Swedish defensemen the way that I look at Dutch football players. They're just going to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I just think you can't overstate how valuable it is that you just know these guys are going to know what they're doing. They're going to play technically strong. They're going to play smart. They're going to play disciplined. There's going to be these types of things. Like, you can have all of the qualms that you want with Lindholm's offensive upside, but he is a product of that Swedish defensive system. And the same thing goes for Jacob Silfverberg, actually, as he is one of the forwards who is developed along those same two-way lines. And I think Jacob Silfverberg has been a little underappreciated as the years have gone on, and getting guys that you can put out in any situation and they're going to know what to do, even if the range of outcomes isn't the highest, having dependable depth is one of the most important parts of being a contender. Being able to go Killorn or Gord or Barclay Goodrow, right? Having these guys, even Pat Maroon, Pierre-Edouard Bellemare, like these are responsible depth players that they can trust to operate in meaningful roles. I mean, look how valuable Darren Helm was for the fucking Colorado this year.
Yeah.
Good depth cannot be overstated. I think, he seems almost kind of, to your point, like one of the guys that where you trade away a prospect and then he comes up and then you're like, oh, who's this guy? Oh, well, he just got brought up to fill in that third pair role. And you're like, oh no, he's like actually really good.
Yeah.
So, I think as far as Odelius is concerned, I get why, everything I've seen is with him is that he's just a really smart guy. He does a really good job at breaking up plays in the neutral zone, not really letting other teams gain the line. Like, yeah, man, I get why some people would look at that and go, that's a top 25 guy. And I get why some people would look at that and go, the upside isn't high enough. I'm not taking that guy in the top 50.
Yeah.
It's a preferential thing.
Yeah.
So I would have no problem with them taking him at 42. I think at 22, it would feel like a reach, given some of which we'll get to in a second, some of the more dynamic forward talent that might still be there. But I if they drafted Calais Odelius, it would be very hard for me to see a world in which I was very upset with that pick.
Yeah, and the diversity in the rankings of where he fell kind of outline what you were saying of some teams really like that and like knowing what you're going to get with him, and the fact that you like again you know what you're going to kind of get with the players that come through, the top defenseman from Sweden. You know, he's ranked as high as 14 by elite prospects. Cam Robinson had him at 17, but then you've got, Pronman in his last one before his most recent one was at 72. Scott Wheeler had him at 50. Recruits got him, had him at 45. Bob McKenzie had him at 36. So he's kind of all over the place on where he could go. He's a guy that could easily, surprise a lot of people and go in that 15 to 20 range, or he could fall to 42 or 53 and be there for the Ducks. So an interesting one. The last guy I just want to give a quick shout to, just because of the Ducks' kind of history of taking guys from the high school circuit. Yeah, go.
Real quick, sorry, I just want to say he fell to 74 in Pronman's latest ranking.
What did I say it was? Oh, so he dropped 2 spots. Okay, yeah, so that's tough.
Oh, you only had him at 72? I thought you had him in the 60s, I thought. That's fine.
No, yeah, Pronman had him at 72.
70.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So he dropped a little bit, though.
Yeah,
so
skating above average, puck skills below average, hockey sense above average, compete average.
So your average Swedish.
He was the top defenseman for a good Swedish junior team that was an important part of Sweden's U18.
Yeah.
Dilly skating pops when you watch him. Yeah, okay. Yeah, man, he's exactly what you were saying. It's just really funny that's what he is.
It's funny because you usually see like 3 or 4 of those guys in the top, around that 20
I mean,
to
that's what
40
Larson
range.
was, but he had the advantage of being 6'2".
Yeah, exactly. But there's not so many
Larson's
of them
not
this year.
6'2". He's not a first-round pick.
No, 100%. Yeah, and it was coming kind of from that era where it still kind of mattered to be that, and everybody was loving. Like, again, I think Lindholm deserved to go where he went in that draft, but there's for a long time, for a good reason, there was an affinity for the big, rangy, responsible, reliable Swedish defenseman. I think there still is. There's just not a lot of them in this draft. Like, it was just kind of a slower year.
Having good players.
Yeah, there's the top Swedish players in this draft are the forwards, for good reason. They're excellent. The last guy I want to give a shout to for who the Ducks could take, not at 22 I would say, but around at 42 if he's still there, is Sam Rinzel. Plays in the high school circuit, and the Ducks have gone there for Lacombe. They've gone there for Ian Moore, and they like to do that with those second-round picks. So I could see this one as a potential, because they're used to that, and their scouting department likes to go that route and take that risk and look at those guys as projects and work on them and run them through the NCAA circuit eventually. And we're seeing that now with Lacombe and with Moore. But Rinzel is 6'4", right shot defenseman, a pretty good skater for his size, but he's just raw, right? Like, and again, it's the unproven circuit. It's high school. Like, no, you look at it and it's hard to translate where they're going to go and what they're going to do from there. They could get to the college game and just look out at their depth, or they could really surprise and take a leap forward. And the concerning thing is when he hasn't played, or when he has played outside the high school level, he hasn't looked as dominant, which I guess is to be expected. So that's kind of the concern and why he's fallen a bit. But it's tough to overlook a guy who can skate as well as he does at 6'4", as a right shot defenseman who's got some good offensive instincts. So he's still getting some love. He's got 4 first-round shouts, as high as 26 and as low as 62. So it is kind of all over the place for where he could go. So I just want to give him a little shout because of the Ducks' history of drafting some of these high school defensemen, that I could see him as one of those second-round options where they go for him just because they're weak on the right side right now, and he's got the speed and size that they like in a circuit that they're used to drafting defensemen from.
Yeah, and again, I think that's an interesting one too, to highlight kind of what we were talking about earlier as far as what the new dynamic is going to be between the scouting department and the developing staff, because those high school players were taken under the old development staff with the understanding that Todd Marchant was going to be going to a lot of those high school games. He was going to be going to their USHL games and those college games when they did finally get there, and he was going to be in contact with these kids. I would have to imagine taking a player like Sam Rinzel, who is, like you said, just at this point, just a blank canvas of potential, right? He's got size, he's got skating, he's really got just about everything you kind of want him to be. The question is can he put it all together? And that's going to require the development staff to really work with him. I don't want to say that he can't do it on his own as far as the amount of work, because obviously if he wants to get better, he's going to have to put in the effort. But this is one of those situations where having a strong development staff makes a huge difference, helping kind of mold these more raw, more just unrefined types of players.
Yeah, and he seems like a really good. When you have 2 seconds or you have 2 firsts in 1 second, the Ducks are in obviously in both of those scenarios having 2 firsts and 2 seconds. He's a nice guy to take. He's a project. You can work on him, and if it all pans out, you got a really nice upside pick with that second round pick, and they've liked that. Like there's just a track record over the last couple of drafts, specifically the defensemen who have performed well in high school. And that have a path laid out in front of them, whether it's the USHL and the NCAA, that they like to kind of go that route. So I could potentially see him as being a guy. All right, forwards, because we're over 2 hours. We still got the forwards to get to.
Louise.
But listen, we love this kind of stuff, and we want to get as many profiles as we can get out there, because we've only got a couple of days before the draft here. It's now officially Wednesday here for me, so one day until the draft. But the first guy I want to profile is one of your favorite guys. We've mentioned him a couple times today. Is Rutger McGroarty as a potential option for the Ducks at 22. Doubt he falls down to 42. I think the lowest he was ranked was 47, but 13 out of the 15 rankings had him in the first round, so he's likely a shout for that 22nd pick.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot to like about the skill set and his fit into the lineup as a whole. Not even, like I know earlier I had made the comment that I think it's very easy to see him as a natural fit alongside Trevor Zegras, but even still, I just think having that type of player, he's got good size, 6 foot, 180. He's committed to Michigan next year, but he's a goal scorer, and he's kind of Connor Geeky as a goal scorer instead of a playmaker. As far as the skating is the thing that gives you issue, but his ability to be strong defensively, strong offensively, to make good reads, to finish plays, just kind of stands out. So. I know I always made fun of him for the last little bit. Oh, no, I was wrong. He was 6'1", 200. Sorry. I was looking at Lambert. I just think having the opportunity to add a right shot finisher is huge. I think as much optimism as you can still have about Perreault, I think it's fair to say that if he was going to be a 40-goal guy, he would probably look a little bit different at this point. I think his development profile would look a little bit different. I still think he can be a very effective sniper. I still think he can be a second-line finisher. But I do think it's fair enough to say at this point that you still have holes in your top 6 that a guy like Rutger McGroarty could very easily and very nicely fill for Anaheim.
Yeah, I believe he can play all 3 forward positions. He's played center, he's played wing. So I think that versatility helps him a little bit. The only thing holding him back from getting up to what at one point was a guy who's considered to be a top 5, top 10 talent is his skating. It's held him back a little bit. He's got a little bit of an awkward stride for a guy his size. And you can refine that and you can work on it. But everything else is there. Like you said, the compete level. He's got the offensive skill. He's got the shot. Defensively, he works hard and he's a good defender. I think the one thing to look at with him and what could be intriguing for him at 22 is you got to consider the role for him in that team. In a team with Cooley, in a team with Nazar, and a team with Isaac Howard, guys who are not bad defensively, because Nazar is great defensively and Cooley is as well, and Howard to some extent. But those guys were given the keys offensively to run that bus for the NTDP. McGroarty, Snuggerud, and a few of the other guys, their roles were, okay, we're going to defensively, we're going to be the second option when it comes to scoring goals and putting up points, but we're going to be the real kind of defensive anchors of this team. So I think there's the potential to unearth some of that offense when you get to the NHL level and you give him a little bit more of an advanced role. And Zegras was an exceptional offensively talented player when he was drafted out of the NTDP. Partially of the reason he fell was because the role he was given on that team wasn't a first-line player. There was Jack Hughes and a few other guys on that team. and
Right.
he had to kind of rein things back a little bit as not the go-to option. And we all know that Trevor Zegras thrives as the guy who can be the go-to option when you give him that ability, when he goes to Boston College and when he obviously comes up with the Ducks and he's been given that opportunity, things start to change for him, right? So I think in the same sense for McGrody, if he comes out, you give him a bit of a role where he can do things more offensively while still relying on that compete level. I think there is a good potential for the upside there. And even if it doesn't come, he's got that a bit of a higher floor that he can be, a middle six competitor that you like to have in your lineup that you can play anywhere, right? And like you said, you can play him up in the lineup with the Zegras, and I think he really fits with a player like that because he's just so smart. He's going to get into the right areas, and he just understands kind of where the play is going and where to be, and that's what you need to do to play with Trevor Zegras. I watched an old interview from the draft back, and Jack Hughes said to play with Zegras, you have to be ready at basically every second, every moment he has the puck. You got to be ready and be in the right position, and that kind of defines what type of player Rutger McGrody is that he always kind of knows where to be and when to be there.
Yeah, I just want to correct this real quick. Rutger McGrody is one of my least favorite things in the entire world, which is a offhand wing. He is a left shot right wing, much like Artemi Panarin is a right shot left wing, which is such a fucking waste of an elite right-handed player. Anyways, it doesn't matter, but I just hate that shit. Why would you
hate
play?
Patrick
Anyways,
Kane?
It doesn't matter. I mean, yeah, but I have so many other reasons to do that.
It's not super uncommon.
No, it's not super uncommon, but it just when like with Artemi Panarin, right? You have an incredibly high-end player, and his preferred position is his offside. And I'm just like, what are we doing? And then it makes sense. Artemi Panarin is a playmaker; he turns his back, kind of thing. Kind of as far as reading the ice and doing things like that. Like, I get it, but it just feels like a wasted opportunity. Anyway,
I feel like it makes so much more sense to have the shooter on the off. Like Ovi plays left wing as a righty because it makes sense because he gets the one-timer off. As for Panarin, it's a bit weird. As the playmaker, you would feel like you'd want to be on your strong side, be on the right side for him as a right-handed shot, be able to get the passes off and find your teammates. But hey, I mean, he makes the big bucks, and he's a lot better at hockey than I am. So there's a reason he's probably on the left wing.
Shut up, dude. But yeah, Tyler Toffoli is who Pronman has as his comp. I've been very critical of Tyler Toffoli, but that has a lot more to do with people paying Tyler Toffoli more money than they should. Mm-hmm. That's not Tyler Toffoli's part. Tyler Toffoli is a very good player. He's been a really effective middle six winger throughout his career, and I think if Anaheim can get a guy like that, I think you're more than happy to take that kind of player.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Especially with with his compete being as high as it is, apparently.
Yeah, I like a lot of
got that dog in him.
The NTDP forwards at 22. McGrody's, I think, a good pick. Isaac Howard is one of my favorites for the Ducks to take at 22. I really like the compliment he could have in the Ducks lineup. He's one of those guys that can play anywhere. He drives his own offense. He's one of the most dangerous players with the puck on his stick, and he's just as dangerous off of it. He's really smart, gets in the right positions, arrives in the right time to the right areas. He is kind of reminiscent to what we've seen from Troy Terry this season, where he attacks the triangles and he really attacks defenders and makes them work and gets in the right positions that way. And I just think, again, being behind Cooley and being behind Nazar, and he's kind of underrated a bit and has fallen down. I think in one of the shouts in the rankings, he was ranked inside the top 10. I'd have to check who that was by. Scott Wheeler had him 10th on his list, ranked as high as 16, 12 by Sam Constantino. So there are some people who really see that potential there. And I think when we look at this draft and when you're looking at that range of guys who could be steals when you look back at this, I think he has the potential to be that. Again, one of the issues with him is he's only 5'10", so the size is not quite there. So there's a little bit of worry about kind of how that game's going to translate to the NHL level at that size. But man, I think this kid is for real. Really like the skill and talent that he brings, and the compete level is. I think the one thing you can say about the NTDP is every player that comes from that program, they compete hard. and they really drill that in there. So I like him a lot. And then Jimmy Snuggerud is the other one, similar to McGrody, big physical guy, two-way player. He's got kind of a well-rounded skill set, good playmaker, good shot, good one-on-one skill, good defender. The skating is kind of an issue, the same as McGrody. So you're looking at two options of either Snuggerud or McGrody, who are guys who can kind of do it all, except the skating's holding them back. And you've got a guy like Howard, who is a really, really skilled, dynamic player, great skater, but the size is holding him back, so it's kind of an inverse opposite there. But some really good options from that program. Again, and the Ducks have liked to go there. I mean, obviously Zegras for sure, but we've seen Henry Thrun, and we've seen Max Jones in the past, and a few others that have come from that program. I know Jones got drafted out of London, but you've got a lot of love from the Ducks for the NTDP.
Yeah, I think the USNTDP has done a really good job of actually really starting to get some quality players into the prospect conversations and really make some difference makers, develop some difference makers. So I think that's a great sign. Maybe someday our men's hockey team will catch up to our women's hockey team, but we don't know. Yeah, I think you said McGrody, Fergus, and Snuggerud, right?
McGrody, Howard, and Snuggerud, yeah.
Oh, Howard.
Isaac
Yeah.
Howard, yeah.
Howard's a good one. I like. Yeah, sorry. I was thinking. I don't know why I was thinking of Fergus. Howard's a good one. I like Howard a lot. I think he plays. If I remember right, I'm thinking of the right guy. He plays with kind of some nastiness in his game, and he's a shit. I'm messing up right now. He's the left wing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, left wing, left shot.
Yeah. No, I think he has a chance to be a really good player. I like when I hear that guys kind of have that grit in them and they're a defined winger, because to me, one of the things that you can do to separate yourself, as a winger is play with that kind of high compete level, play with that edge, because as a winger, you're always going to be looking at secondary, especially in a draft, to centers. And if you are able to kind of add that snarl and have that kind of vicious forechecking part of your game be there, I think you can really do a lot to separate yourself and make an impression. So, I mean, all the three guys that you have, they all make a lot of sense. I think McGrody would Snuggerud is now my top pick just because he's actually a right-handed shot. But I do think, bringing in a guy who can play center or right wing, even if he is left-handed, in McGrody, I think that would be the guy I would be the most interested in taking in that spot. But the other guy is Jagger Fergus. I wanted to mention him because I just love the confidence with which he played. I think I mentioned this last time. They talked to him and they asked him, like, are you worried at all about all this conversation about how small you are? And he's like, I've been small my whole life. It's not going to change. Like, I don't care. And I just think that's phenomenal. And from things I've heard on other podcasts as far as guys who have actually talked to this kid, like Cam Robinson and Chris Peters and some of these guys, he just seems to have that really kind of enjoyable swagger to his game. He doesn't come off as arrogant or disrespectful or any kind of that. It's just more of just like, man, I'm good at this, and I know I am. And if you don't want to take that risk, that's fine. I'm going to be just fine. And I love that. I would love to get some more of that kind of swagger and confidence into this team, because I do think we're seeing it with Zegras, and I think McTavish will bring a different dynamic to that. But I think, again, if we could inject that kind of high-paced, offensive skill players into this lineup in supporting roles, I think that could be a huge boost for Anaheim's ability to really transition into that modern skating and skill game.
Yeah, I like Fergus a lot too. I think it's weird to say he's a different kind of small than the guys we've been talking about, like Isaac Howard, who's 5'10", 181. Fergus is 5'10", which really isn't super small for a forward. You're like right on that borderline of, if you're 1 inch taller, you're around like the NHL average.
Pounds.
But he weighs 154 pounds. Like like he's a different kind of small. Like you really like how much weight can he put on, and how big's he really going to be? And I think that's the concern with him, is the skills there. He's got one of the better shots. He's one of the quicker skaters. Really, when you look at one-on-one skill and the ability to beat defenders, he's near the top of the list for that. So like, oh wow, he's profiling pretty well. But again, like that size is what hampers him and brings him down to a later first-round pick, because you say this with all the smaller guys, but you package them in a 6'1" frame, and they're like, top 10 shouts with that skill level. But unfortunately, that's the one thing I think that is kind of holding him back a little bit. His skating stride is also not perfect, which is why he's probably kind of falling in that 20 to 30 range, because it isn't just the size. There's a little bit of issue that with the way he skates and getting enough power behind it. But I like him. I like that mindset, like you said. I think there's a vision of where he could be at the NHL level. He's playing in junior and looked like one of the better players in the WHL. So there's a good track record for the Ducks in that league too. But I do have my reservations, again, like we had talked about with Havlat and Lane Hudson, in looking at some comparables and some blueprints of players who have made it, and guys at that kind of size, the smaller frame that he has. Can he play in the NHL at 5'10", 5'11", at 170, 180 pounds? Probably, maybe, but I don't know. It's going to be tough for him to kind of bulk up, where you can see some of these other guys like Howard at 5'10", and a few of the other forwards and defensemen we've talked about. I'm trying to remember, Chesley, I believe, as well, and Casey. Like, those are guys who will play at 190, 200, even though being a little bit smaller, so that's fine. Like, they won't get pushed around as much. He's going to have to hope that skill is enough to kind of take him to the next level, right? In a Johnny Gaudreau-esque type player, where you can play at like 170, 180, but the skill is what sets you apart, and is able to take you to that next level.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. It's exactly just like Johnny Gaudreau. One of the things I was thinking about is when Marco Rossi was in the draft, there was like, how many 5'9", 5'10" number one centers really are there? And they're like, not a lot, but also there aren't a lot of people that are that size that are built like Marco Rossi is, where he's got that really strong base.
Yep.
And he's just someone you're not going to be able to knock off the puck. For Fergus, that's not the case. He doesn't have that base. Like you said, he's an incredibly slight guy. He's real thin, and if he is going to be effective, he is going to have to use elusiveness, right? He's going to have to be smarter and faster than the guys around him. Pronman doesn't have his skating as rated anything. His skating is rated as NHL average, which is fine, but I think we've talked about this before. At that size, your skating almost needs to be perfect in order to make the most of the skills that you have at that size. I would almost rather he be 20 pounds heavier than 2 inches taller, just because it just gives him a little bit more. But he seems to have an incredible, like, he's supposed to have a really high-end shot. He's supposed to be a really great finisher. Like, if the talent is legitimately there, then I think you take that risk and you just bring him in and you go, look, we got Trevor Zegras, and that kid weighs 40 pounds soaking wet. So we understand that, we're going to have to get some of these kids on milkshakes and stuff. But we think that the skill is strong enough that what we'll be able to do is develop a aggressive attacking team with high skilled players, that even some of the smaller players that we have are going to be able to impose their will, just in a different style. So yeah, I mean, again, like, I think for me, McGroarty would be at the top of my list of that kind of group of four. I think I would probably prefer to try to trade into the top of the second round, maybe move on from that Boston pick next year, and see if you could snake a guy like Isaac Howard in that 30, 34, 35, 36 range. But still, if you walk out of any one of those guys, you're getting a guy who has offensive production as a significant upside to their game.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'm loving. Like I said, I'm loving Isaac Howard at that at that spot just because of the production he had this year and the potential he has. I mean, he led that whole program in scoring. More points than Cooley, more points than Nazar, more points than McGrody, more points than anybody in that Cutter Gauthier, right? So I think he's not getting a ton of love just again because he is a winger who's 5'10", but that whole program is small, man. We talked about all these guys. You're either 6'3", 200 pounds in that program, or you're 5'10", 180. Like the Cooley, Nazar, Isaac Howard, 5'10", 180. Snuggerud, McGrody, 6 foot. Lane Hudson, 5'8". Like you're either tall or small. There's no middle ground there unless you're Ryan Chesley and you're right in the middle. Everybody else is either too big and can't skate, or skates really well and is really small. So I'll take it. And one guy we gotta look for next year who also plays in that program, Jacob Perreault's brother, Gabe Perreault, had a really good season. He's a top prospect for next year. So, but he's 5'10", 154. So he's also
come on, man.
That's gonna be a tough one.
Just somebody in this program eat a steak, for the love of God.
All right. Well, we go from small boys to some guys who probably did eat some steaks. Bigger forward. Let's get to the Swedes. I like the trend for Swedish players lately, where we went from that reliable two-way centers and defensemen. We've had Holtz and Raymond come through, and now you've got Lekkerimäki this year. And then the next two guys we're going to talk about, Liam Ogren and Noah Ostlund, are the two guys who could be around 22. Some projections of them to go around. I think Ogren and Ostlund had top 10 shouts in the rankings I had. I know Ogren had 2 top 10, and then it was 8th by Cam Robinson and 10 by Scouching. And then Noah Ostlund, he was a little bit further down. I don't see him on here. Oh, there he is. 1 top 10 shout, 10th by Smart Scouting. So Ogren seems to be kind of the...
Every time you say that, it makes me laugh so damn hard.
What?
Smart Scouting.
Yeah.
Because you have to... It's SMAHT.
Like
I get... But that's why they did it. But it's just so funny to hear you be like, well, the process at Smart Scouting is the best. It's so funny.
Got to spin the Boston accent on it. But, yeah, Liam Ogren is slowly becoming one of my favorites if he somehow is there at 22. Big, strong, shot first winger. Comparables that he's been, I think Elite Prospects have this comparables as JT Miller and Timo Meier, which you love to see. And his 1.93 points per game was the new record for per game scoring in the J20. And there's been a lot of good players who've come from the J20, which is the junior circuit in Sweden. And he broke that points per game record. Like 1.93 points per game is unbelievable. But he just looks like a really well put together player. Does everything right. Uses his size to his advantage. Has a really good shot. His skating is pretty good. He doesn't really use the playmaking to his advantage, but he's got enough playmaking skill that he can make the right first pass and find open teammates. Compete level is high. Defensive play is adequate, but it's at kind of an average NHL level. So what he's going to be is that kind of goal-scoring, physical power forward at the NHL level, where the defense is kind of escapes him a little bit, but the maximum side of his defensive game is he's just going to play physical and be tough to play against. It's not so much him. He's not going to be kind of your shutdown big winger. He's going to be more of the goal-scoring side of things, but I like him a lot. Like, he's come a long way. He's a guy who shot up the rankings because of his season and his offensive production. There was concerns about his work rate in the past, but he kind of put that well behind him this year, and he shot up into kind of top 10 territory. So he's one of those guys, again, when you look at 22, if for some reason he falls and he's available there, he's probably one of the players with the highest upside at that spot.
Yeah, I mean, look, if that's, this is, again, one of those guys that I just didn't get to, but, I've heard his name a couple of times, and he's one of those guys that they're putting in there as someone who could sneak into the late teens. And, if that's the case and you can get him at 22, or, what do you call it? Pronman in his newest one has Ogren at 28, and he has Ostlund at 30. So the idea that those guys might be around at 42 is a little harder to see, and taking them at 22 might feel like a little bit more of a reach. But the the fact of the matter is everybody's board is going to be a little different. And if, like you said, because they do come from that Swedish system, and you do know that there's going to be a bit more of that responsibility just kind of baked into the way that they play. I would have a very hard time finding a reason to dislike either of these choices. I think I would probably lean towards Ogren, just because of how strong his shot is. But beyond that, I really don't see how you could go wrong with either pick as far as being willing to take the bet on the player you're choosing.
Yeah, I lean,
which is fundamentally, what you're doing.
Yeah,
I know that sounds stupid, but like it is. Like you're not betting on them to be this player. You're betting on them to be one of the players that comes out of the draft. Like, never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about. Just keep.
You're saying you're betting on what they're going to be down the road, right? So, yeah, I tend to lean towards Liam Ogren as well. I think there's a clear fit of where he could come in on the left wing, right? As a top 6 potential with this team and playing without Zegras or McTavish. You just either load up with McTavish and have 2 physical, really good shots on one line, or you play him with Zegras as that kind of go to the net with a good one-timer option for Ogren. Austin, I like projection-wise, a 5'10" center. Probably going to shift to the wing at some point. Then you have always concerns on how the game translates. I really do like him, but I think more so for if the Ducks were picking at 22, I would tend to go for Ogren. I'm just going to mention the guys we had listed here. I didn't get a ton of looks at these guys either, so I don't want to go in too much detail on them. A few of the Euro guys outside of Sweden and Finland, we had Yuri Kulich, who I believe is one of the Czech forwards. He's been getting some shouts for top 10, top 15. Just kind of one of those well-rounded guys. Has a good shot, had a good year, so he's jumped up the standings. Filip Mesar, another one of the Slovakian players who, this is their year for the draft when you look at Slavkovsky and Nemec, and then Mesar, who could be one of 3 of their countrymen to go in the first round, which is great for them. He looks like, again, one of the smaller forwards who's just really speedy, good agility, and just a well-rounded game, and it just comes down to his size, again, for him and where he can project. He is, I believe, a right shot on the right wing, so there you go. He profiles pretty well.
Now we're talking. Let's go.
And then the other 2 guys quickly mentioned, Owen Beck and Nathan Gauthier out of the CHL. Beck plays for Mississauga in the OHL. Bigger, defensively focused center. He's a good 2-way guy, really good in his own end, great speed. So if you're looking for a guy who projects well as like a really nice option as your third line C, he's a safe pick for the Ducks if they want to. I wouldn't pick him at 22. There are some shouts for him to go in the first round, but if he's there, if he falls down to 42, he's a nice option to round out your bottom 6. And then the same can kind of be said for Nathan Gauthier, bigger guy, a solid defensive game. Skating still a little bit of an issue, but he's a guy that before the season started was getting some shouts for the top 10. Just the offense didn't kind of round out as much as people had hoped it would. So he's a nice option for the Ducks potentially to go at that spot. But we're nearing 2.5 hours, so I want to just kind of get your thoughts. I know you had some guys you wanted to talk about. Anybody we haven't talked about at this 22 to 42, 53 range that you think we missed, or you want to just kind of key in on some of those guys that you're looking at for later on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think we got it. We kind of did a good job of covering a lot of the options. I think, we kind of have an idea of what kind of players Anaheim is going to be looking for, what qualities that Pat Verbeek says he's looking for in these players, and we can, distill a little of that from his time in Tampa Bay and Detroit, from the way that he played the game himself, things like that. I think, I think if nothing else, we're going to end up with guys who are going to work. And as stupid as it sounds, and whenever Brett gets around to waking up, he'll be pissed about it. But I don't think it can be. I don't think it should be dismissed so easily how much want to matters when the margins become as small as they are when you're looking at nth percentile hockey players, nth percentile athletes, nth percentile, professional sports player. Like it's just that want to can make a significant difference. And if nothing else, look at how far Brad Lambert has fallen in this draft as a testament to just how much even the perception that the compete isn't there can hurt you. There's obviously mitigating factors as far as waning interest from players or extenuating circumstances as far as things that detract the players' attention, or the situation could be false. But I am very excited about what I think the general DNA of this team is going to look like going forward under Verbeek. The two guys that I just wanted to mention, Scott Wheeler put out an article that was the guys who just missed his top 100. I went over it looking for guys, hoping maybe one or two of these guys would pop, in this 5, 6, 7 rounds, just because, like you said, like after that first 100 picks, it just becomes kind of a free for all, and anybody can go anywhere in the 4 through 7 rounds. The two guys that he mentioned are just really fun. One of them's name's Josh Nadeau. He's a 5'7" winger who plays on a line with his brother, who's a year younger than him for, I think, one of the CHL teams. I can't quite remember which one, but I think he starts with like a pen.
Yeah, it's
BCHL?
Yeah, British Columbia Hockey League. Yeah, it's kind of like the league that McCarr came from, except McCarr came from the Alberta Junior Hockey League, so it's the same kind of format but out in BC. So it's like I don't know the whole. It's like junior A, junior B. So it's like a step below the CHL basically.
Okay, yeah, but like he I highly recommend that anybody who does have an athletic article search it out, because he talks about what it is, and he literally says if this guy was 2 inches taller, he would almost guaranteed to be a top 60 pick. His hockey sense is incredible. His skating is incredible. His ability to manipulate players around him, draw players in, keep players away, things like that. He just shows a truly dynamic offensive skill set, and I would fucking love for Anaheim to take a flyer on a guy like that. The other guy is the exact opposite. It's a 6'7", 6'5" defenseman named Liam Steele, who was born in Canada, but did the majority of his development in England, and played in and was just kind of raised in the English development system for whatever that is, and then came over and started playing the Canadian high school circuit, basically the prep school circuit. And you watch this kid, and he's just one of those kids that, like, you can tell he wasn't taught how to do certain things, because the way that he does it is not natural. Like, there's a quote in the Wheeler in the article from Scott Wheeler, where he's talking to a scout, and he goes, "It's kind of awesome, because if he had been over here the entire time, we would have like drilled those habits or those thoughts out of him. And because he was just over there being bigger, stronger than a bunch of little British kids, like, he got to try all this different stuff and develop these different things. And like, you see him just coming down from the point, like making these incredible plays, like making passes out from behind the net. And, the guy says it's going to take, I think Scott Wheeler specifically said, it's going to take 4 or 5 years to know what you have, if anything, in him. But the upside is so high that I would love to see Anaheim take a flyer on him later in one of the rounds. It would just be a lot of fun. I just think, having those guys that you can take those types of flyers on, just like Galimov before, where it's like, yeah, like the raw tools are there, and we've seen these flashes of him, looking like he can be a meaningful player. It's just about whether, it's just a sequence of flashes, or if there is some more substance there. So, those are just the two guys for me that I really wanted to mention. I highly recommend going to YouTube, looking the kids up. Liam Steele, Liam Steele, Josh Nadeau, Joshnadeau. They're just fun, man. They're just a lot of fun. And I would be beyond happy to, even if they only ever got as far as San Diego, it would be fun to go get to watch, players just be fun, play fun hockey. That's just, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, man. It's like, I know it sounds stupid and cliche, but like we do this because we love it. We do it because it's enjoyable. And when you have players who can really bring that out in the way that they play, it's the best. There's nothing like it. Watching players play with a sense of joy is just phenomenal.
I can't debate it. I like it. I like the picks. I got a few guys I wanted to mention real quick of some guys I like for the draft. First one, Adam Sikora. I always like one of the younger guys in the draft. I think there's a lot of work you can be done there. He does kind of everything well, about an average skill set in pretty much every category. The fact that he's a September birthday of 04, again, he kind of slips just under the wire, just like Zellweger did. So you've got that kind of extra year of development that you have on other players. I like him as that, maybe that pick at 53, or if you could somehow get into the third round and snag him there. And just to work with him. Again, like I said, one of the younger players, he's kind of done everything well. He's played a lot of international hockey, played at the World Championships for Slovakia. I don't know what's going on there, but their golden age is coming through in this draft with Slavkovsky, Messar, Sikora, and Nemec. But I like him a lot as one of those guys you can kind of just work on and take a swing on and hope that, that extra year is going to do him well when everything's said and done. I like David Goyette from the Sudbury Wolves. Excellent season on a really, really bad team in Sudbury, 73 points in 66 games in what was his rookie season in the OHL. So impressive numbers from him. Got up with Canada's under 18 team, scored 3 points in 4 games. Really well-rounded skill set, really smart player, quick, but not getting a ton of love just really because of the market that he played in. I think if he played in a better team with some more skilled teammates, this is a guy that would be considered for the first round. So I like him as a potential shout for that pick at 42 if he's there. And then the other guy I had was Noah Warren, big 6'5" right shot defenseman.
Yeah.
JHL. Yeah, you had mentioned him a couple times. One of the most physical, hard-hitting players in the draft. Everything else is a work in progress. The hockey sense, the skating, the playmaking. But
it's Drew Hunter.
Yeah, he's
Hunter.
He's a big, mean kid.
Yeah, I love it, man.
I think
bring that kid in.
I think he's 6'5", 225 now.
It's a fucking load, dude.
Yeah, he's ready to
get that kid in here. Let him start picking on some of these guys.
Yeah, and he's relatively young for the draft. He's got a July birthday, so he's relatively young, a couple 7 or 8 months younger than some of the older players in this draft. The offense took a bit of a step forward this year in his second year. He went from 4 points in 29 games to 24 points in 62 games, so starting to kind of develop maybe that side of his game. But nonetheless, you're getting a big physical kid who loves to just hit people.
Or people. Yeah, I love it.
You love to see it. He's been getting, I think he had 1 vote for a late first-round pick, and he's been kind of aiming around that mid to late second-round area. So, again, 2 second-round picks. You get an upside pick with one of them. Maybe you take this bit of a safer option here where you know what you're going to get with this guy. And what I like about it, again, the Ducks don't have anybody really like him in the system right now. So it's nice to bring kind of a guy like that in to kind of round out your system. You could see him being that kind of bottom pairing right-handed defenseman that a lot of teams like to have that just brings you that physical presence you can play in your penalty kill. So I like him as a potential option too. I just wanted to give him a shout out. So.
Yeah, I think, it's one of those things where I think there is this is the last thing I'll say, and then we'll get the hell out of here because it's like 3 days from now. I think the first round is over now for you.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that I think there's this notion going around, and I think there's legitimacy to it, that you can always trade for or find free agents that fit those bottom of the lineup roles. I always think it is better to develop those guys internally, because it sounds terrible, but like those are the guys who usually end up willing to take more team-friendly deals because they got that vote of confidence. And, sometimes they feel like they wouldn't necessarily be in that position if the team that drafted them hadn't taken that chance on them. And so, I really do think like that's, one of the things last year was with Josh Lapina. I thought that was a great pick. He's not going to be more than, I can't imagine he's ever even a third line center. but he's a perfectly good player to have. He's going to be smart. He can kill penalties. There's upside there in as far as what he'll be able to do in a bottom six role. And I think having those guys internally can be really, really beneficial. And guys like Noah Warren and Josh Lupina, those are the kinds of guys that bringing in with your late round picks can have disproportionate value, because the truth of the matter is finding Mark Stone's hard. Like, you're not going to find Mark Stone or Troy Terry. You know, if you get Josh Manson, you should be very, very happy with that. And, so I just think having those kinds of guys in your system already can help you from making mistakes like giving Barclay Goodrow a 7-year, $5 million contract.
I love how that's always our reference now for any of these guys. It's always Barclay Goodrow. I love it. It makes sense.
And Blake Coleman.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing I want to do before we wrap up here, because this is going to be the last time we're going to hop on here before the draft. Scouting did this. I thought it was a really cool idea. I want your picks, like your brain picks for who you would take at 10, 22, and 42, and then your gut takes on who you think the Ducks will draft based off their history and kind of what they need in the system right now. So start off with your picks. If you were the man in charge for the Ducks, who would you take at 10, 22, and 42?
I think I would go Nazar, McGroarty, and if he was there, I might take Maverick Lamoureux to really bring some of that beef. But honestly, I might have talked myself into Matthias Havlet a bit more than I thought I would have. So I'll go with him. I'll say come out of there with an offensive defenseman. So I'll say Nazar, and then McGroarty and Matthias Havlet. What about you?
Still, my brain picks are still the same first two, Kuczynski, Howard at 10, 22. A bit of a flyer. If Miroshnichenko is there at 42, that is my pick for who I would take. Other than that, I wouldn't mind seeing them, because my first two picks are kind of a little bit riskier, going a bit of a safer option. So looking at maybe like an Owen Beck at that spot, or if Rutger McGroarty falls, he was ranked in some cases around the 30 to 40 range. I doubt it, but somebody like that, right, where you can get a bit of a safer option at that pick, a Seamus Casey or something, where you know what you're getting after taking a couple of those risks, and then you can take another risk with your late second. As for did you end up saying what you think the Ducks will do, or no?
No, I wanted to hear your three first.
Okay, yeah. So that would be my three. Kuczynski and Howard are kind of my locks of who I would like. I just really like what they could bring, where they fit in the roster. At 42, I'm going to say Miroshnichenko, because I think he'll still be there. And I'm all for it, man. That guy is top 10 potential in the second round. You got to do it. All right, your picks for the gut picks. Who you think the Ducks will take? It can be the same. Can be.
I'm going to say Lekaramaki,
Okay.
Bichelle, and I'll say George.
I like it.
Or Isaac Howard. I think he could be there around in the early 40s, and I think they could take him.
I got three guys. I'm kind of weighing up on who the Ducks could take. Lekaramaki was one of my guys. And then I'm looking at Geeky or
It was
Casper.
between him and Korchinski for me.
Yeah. Okay. I like it. I think Korchinski seems to make sense for a lot of people for the Ducks, which I get it. I mean, there's the Theodore connection. They need a left shot defenseman, a bigger offensive guy to go with Drysdale. I think for my gut pick for 10, I'm going with Marco Casper. I hope you're right. I just think he's kind of like the perfect Pat Verbeek player, right? Like, I just feel like they like what they could get from him, and they know what they have in Zegras and McTavish, and he's just a bit different. They don't really have anything like him yet, and he's going to play in the roster. And if this is a team that, yes, they're in a rebuild, but they're looking to kind of come out of it a little bit sooner, I think Casper is one of the guys from this draft who's probably a bit closer to the NHL, just based on the way he plays. So I think at 10, he's my gut pick for them. At 22, I think they go defenseman. If Pickering is there, I think he's their guy because they are looking for that big shot defenseman. And then I would also put Bichelle in that mix, same as you. If they don't get that defenseman at 10, I'm going with them getting one of those two guys at 22. And then after those two picks, since they're safer, I think this is where they take that little bit of a leap at 42, and where you could see a Havilland potentially or Sam Renzel to go to that what they've done in the past with some of those high school guys. I think that's where you could see that, and grabbing a right shot defenseman too with that pick. So I would say my gut picks are Casper, we'll say Pickering, and Renzel or Havilland at 42. What to see?
I don't see Casper making it past the 8 pick, but if he's there at 10, the only reason I would hesitate to draft him is if Nazar is there too.
Yeah.
And even then, I don't know. That's a hard one. If it came down to Nazar versus Casper, that would be a very hard choice for me to make. I would probably call San Jose immediately and ask what they wanted for 11.
yeah, to see if which guy is their guy at that point. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I think I would still take Nazar on upside. Again, for me, like the what it boils down to of who I would rather pick, I always go for kind of what the upside is. What's the highest upside you can get from this guy? I think both of their floors are fairly safe in terms of I think they're going to be NHL players in Nazar and Casper, but the pure ceiling, I think of potential all-star ability, I think goes to Nazar just slightly. But I love Casper. I love the way he plays. I think he'd fit awesome in this team, and a team with, despite being a smaller guy, Zegras plays on the edge, and he's got that aggressive side to him. Then you add McTavish to that, and you bring Casper in. Like, that's get back to being a tough team to play against, right? Like, it's you like to see it. So we'll come back to this after Thursday and Friday and see where we land. See if we're correct.
Yeah, I imagine we'll try to sit down Saturday or Sunday and go over everything that kind of went down and go from there. And I know we kind of are hoping still to have somebody after the draft to sit down with and go over some of the picks and get their a bit more informed opinion on some of the players.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we did the mistake of leaving it late to ask our normal guests to come on for the draft preview, and surprise, they are all fairly busy with draft prep.
Yeah.
So we do have.
I was going to say all of.
Yeah, go.
Oh, I was going to say all of which you were incredibly gracious, just phenomenally unavailable.
Yeah. So that was tough, but hey, it was fun. We got to jump on and talk about a bunch of different guys. We've got like Steven said, a tentative interview kind of scheduled and in place, guests to come on to do the recap, look at who the Ducks drafted, where those guys fit in the system, and some of the seasons from some of the prospects like McTavish and Zellweger. So that's the plan post-draft for this Thursday. I'm planning, I've got it set. We'll see how it all falls into place to be live for the first round of the draft and walk us through picks 10 and 22. We'll see if you can come on or if any of the other guys are available that day to jump on with us. Knowing the first round, it's going to go from probably 7 to 9, which I guess for you guys is 4 to 6. It's going to be an extra hour of nothingness drawn out for commercials and nonsense. But we'll be live. It's a nice draft in the sense that we've got like 10 and 22. There's enough space between them where like you get to watch the first 9 picks and kind of build up to the suspense of who the Ducks can get. Then you got 10, then you start to see some reaches, and then you got 22, and then you can just kind of sit back and maybe they trade up into the late first and whatever. So there should be some excitement and at least some Ducks angles towards the entire first round of the draft. Let's hope, and maybe some trades. So it'll be a lot of fun. I'm hoping it goes pretty well. I can't remember. I don't think I did a live draft for the McTavish one, but the last one we did a live draft for was for Zegras, which obviously was a lot of fun, being live and watching him fall down to 9. So we'll see how this year goes.
Yeah, it should be a blast, and if nothing else, we should have something to bitch about when the draft is over.
Yeah.
Which is always fun.
Another 2-hour and 45-minute pod coming in. But I like how this is part 2. If you make it through part 1 and part 2 of this draft, you need something. You deserve something of this preview. The fact the first one was like 2 hours and 15 minutes. This one's just hit over 2 hours and 50 minutes. If you're watching 5 hours of our draft preview, I respect you. I respect you a lot to go through, sit through us talking a bunch, especially how like 20 minutes of this podcast was us talking about the Sens and what they could do at 7 and if they'd move the pick. So, yeah, a lot of fun. Oh boy, we had a question that got highlighted. I saw this earlier. We forgot to ask it. We got to ask it because he highlighted it. I'm not gonna leave him hanging here. Goalie RB in the chat. We'll get through this as quickly as we can here with respect to the question. He said, with the likelihood of Gibson being traded, do you see Dostal take over the number 1 spot with Stolarz being number 2? Also, with Durney on the rise and acquiring Calle Clang, is Eric Sinak likely to drop to contract termination or trade option? Let's start with the first part. With the likelihood of Gibson being traded, do you see Dostal taking over the number 1 and Stolarz being number 2 for next year?
No, I think Dostal comes in as a 2B. I think he becomes that third goalie. I think depending on who they bring, if they get a goalie back, I would expect that goalie to probably be either the starter or a split-time guy with Stolarz. I think Stolarz has certainly played well enough to earn the opportunity to be the starter. But I do not think Dostal... I don't see him playing 20 games next year. Like, if he hit 20 games, something either went really well or really wrong. Mm-hmm. For me, at least. I don't see a situation in which he's up full-time.
I don't see him taking over the number 1 spot. I definitely don't see him starting there. I mean, there's obviously a world which he just pops off and earns it. Like, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Stolarz, if Gibson is traded and no goaltender either comes back in that trade or gets signed in the offseason, is going to be the number 1 next year if Gibson isn't here. Dostal might be the number 2. But, like, honestly, in all seriousness, if Gibson is traded and there's no goal, I think... First of all, I think when he gets traded, a goaltender is coming back the other way. That's going to be in tandem with Stolarz, like a Mrazek or a Samsonov or something like that, right?
Cam Talbot.
Yeah, Cam Talbot, right? So I
want Cam Talbot on this team. I would get that jersey so fast.
Yeah, but that's the first thing is I think a goaltender comes back in that trade anyway. Even if they don't, I think the Ducks could go out and sign a veteran, number 2, number 3 to play with Stolarz and be that cover if Dostal comes up and plays well or doesn't play well, that he can go back down and you've got that backup. So I don't think he takes over immediately as the number 1, but I will give it a slim chance because he has the pedigree and the talent to come up and just break out and take over. So there is a slim chance that I think by the end of the season he could potentially be the number 1, but it is a long shot and I wouldn't bank on it.
Soon to be.
Yeah,
I think soon to be number 1. I think we could get to a position like him where we got to with John Gibson early on, where you're like, oh, he's next.
Yeah.
But I have a very hard time seeing him play 20 games this year. And between this season coming up and next season, if he played 60 games, I would be very surprised.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if he gets 10 to 15 games,
he's probably 2 years away from being a full-on starter.
Yeah, which is fine.
I agree.
You can get a handful of games. The second part of the question, we'll just touch it quickly here. With Durney on the rise and acquiring of Calle Clang, is Eric Sinak likely to either get his contract terminated or traded? I think so, honestly. I think Klang's going to come over and play next year, and I think Durney's going to be down there, and then Dostal might still be down there. So something's got to give way, and I think Eric Sinak is probably the most likely guy. They've given him the run. They've given him the runway. I can't imagine he is on his way back with some of the other goaltenders that the Ducks have in the system. But you never know. I mean, they seem to like him down there. So.
Yeah, I would expect somebody to get moved other than Gibson. I mean, they even still have Gage Alexander, and they've got plenty of guys in the pipeline at goalie. And between Dostal and Klang, they seem to have 2 guys who look like legitimate candidates to take over the number 1 job down the line. So, unfortunately, yeah, I do think that probably ends with the Eric Sinek getting traded. If that's what happens, I would love to see him go to Minnesota to play with his brother, since I doubt they're going to send Eric Sinek here for him to play with his. So
yeah, Gibson and Eric Sinek and go in the deal to bring Talbot plus back for John Gibson.
Yeah,
so there you
let's
go.
make it happen.
A little bit of a feel-good addition to that trade for Eric Sinek. So I like it. Or we just bring Joel Eric Sinek here. So
yeah, why not?
which
Sure.
I'd be fine with. I'm not sure Minnesota would be, but. All right, that's gonna do it for this show. I don't want to get to 3 hours. I can't release this at 3 hours. I can't do it. Can't do that to you guys. So appreciate you guys hanging out with us, talking draft. We're excited for Thursday and Friday. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of potential things on the plate for the Ducks to happen. At the very least, we're going to get some really good young players added to the rebuild, and things are looking bright at the end of the tunnel for the Ducks this year. So we got lots of content on the way. Like we said, draft preview, draft day live, free agency preview, and then we're looking to do some interviews this off season and just a bunch of whatever we want to do. So I know we've got some.
Yeah, we're gonna try to fuck around this off season. So
yeah, we got a lot of
Just
weird
goof off
stuff
a little bit.
planned, as we always do. So the four of you who are still here, I applaud you for sticking around this long. I appreciate you, everybody who did come out tonight, and anybody listening after the fact.
If you stayed for longer than 2 hours, please see a medical professional.
Yeah, I don't know how you did it.
We appreciate y'all, though. Anybody who came in, even if you popped in for 5 minutes, we always appreciate it. So,
all right, guys. We will be back here live. Looks like we've got everything figured out with the live stream. Fingers crossed from now on. So we will be back here live for Thursday and back after the draft with the draft review. Take care, guys. We'll see you then.
bye, everybody.